Okay.
Just to refresh it.
Good evening, everyone. We are live and in the meeting. If everyone would just take a moment and silence their cell phones. Also, if anyone wants to speak tonight, there is a sign-up table out in the hallway. If you decide during the meeting that you want to sign up to speak, just make your way out into the hallway and sign up to speak, and it will populate on our list right here in the council chambers, so we'll be able to see it. If you could please rise for a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. We don't have any proclamations tonight, so we're going to jump right into the consent agenda. Council, do I have questions, comments, or a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Item C, acknowledgement of the success of the piloting of programs for food scraps drop-off and appreciation for staff's dedication to redirecting food waste and composting as part of healthy food systems in Asheville and Buncombe County.
Mayor, I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Okay.
I second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda, and we don't have anyone to sign up to speak under this.
We do. Miss Aldridge, if you'll just refresh your.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm looking at the list. Okay, yes, all right, we have one person signed up to speak under the consent agenda. Speakers, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Please watch the lights on the lectern. Green means go, orange means you're getting close to the end, and red means stop. So, Ms. Aldridge, if you'll please come forward.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here to agree and kind of protest at the same time for the tourist stadium for the $875,000 annually for 20 years.
Is this item on the consent?
For the stadium? Mhm.
No, that item's not on the consent agenda.
Pardon?
That, is it?
I think it might be Memorial Stadium. Item F is what Sandy signed up for.
It's Memorial Stadium.
Is Memorial
Please,
Stadium.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, anyway, I'm here to be an activist for sidewalks and things of that nature for us locals and tourists. And any big amount of money, I'm just worried about because of the need for so many things in our city, as the sidewalks and that type of thing. And that's pretty, I love for kids to have somewhere to go to. That's fabulous. But as far as the money goes, I would like to go back and look exactly at what monetary spending the city is doing on that project. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I had a curiosity about this one because it was brought to my attention that there was something about sidewalks that was missing, but I didn't see anything that that would exclude sidewalks. So if there's need for follow-up, that would help.
With regard to the memorial project?
Yeah, item F, I think that's what we're being asked about, but I didn't see an exclusion of sidewalks. So I wasn't sure if we're missing something.
Sidewalks in the park, in the stadium? Memorial.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what to say about that one. That was brought to my attention that we're excluding sidewalks, and I don't see it. So.
Yeah, that's not my, I mean, that's,
We're getting Jade in.
okay. Jade Dundas, everybody, here to talk about capital projects, specifically Memorial. I guess there was a question about sidewalks. I mean, the project itself, of course, includes a track and a walkway, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, the Jay Dundas, Capital Projects Director. Yeah, the details of Memorial Stadium have been agreed upon since last March. We proceeded checking in with council last fall on the details of the scope of that project. It does include pedestrian accessibility improvements around the stadium, Primarily, it's a track, running track up there, and there's also restroom facilities, but there will be, there's no off-site sidewalks necessarily as part of the scope of this project, but the pedestrian routes around the area and the park are certainly an improvement that will be made as part of this project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Any other questions or comments? All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the consent agenda is adopted. We have a number of presentations and reports under the presentations and reports section of our agenda. And the first one on my list is the presentation of the fiscal year 2024 annual operating budget. Let me just say real quickly, there's been a little bit of confusion around this. The public hearing on the budget will be at next week's meeting, next 2 weeks, meeting 2 weeks from today. But we're going to see this presentation and not take public comment until 2 weeks from today. So Taylor Floyd, take it away.
Well, if you don't mind, Mayor.
Or manager, take it away. He's on my thing here. I'll hand it to you, Deborah. And then
Absolutely, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and City Council staff in the Asheville community. We've reached an important milestone in the budget process. Tonight, staff will be presenting the manager's proposed fiscal year 2023-2024 budget. Before we dive into the details of the budget, I want to begin by thanking our incredibly hardworking staff. As you know, the budget process takes a village with input provided by staff in all of our city departments. But I want to especially acknowledge and thank staff in our finance and management department. Finance Director Tony McDowell, staff in the budget division led by our own Taylor Floyd, and our budget analysts, who are pretty much our unsung heroes, Heather Curry, Abigail Riley, and Liz Green, for their patience throughout this process, but especially for their professionalism and technical advice. I also want to thank you, Mayor and Council, for your service to this great city and for your time, for the input and guidance you've provided us thus far in this process, as well as community members who participated in the online survey of budget priorities. Next slide. So a lot of information will be presented tonight. It's kind of already been shared with you over the past several work sessions, so forgive us for being repetitive. But in case there are people in the community who are seeing or hearing this budget presentation for the first time, we wanted to provide the background, the full context, and rationale for the proposed recommendations. Now, Taylor Floyd will be doing the majority of the presentation. Will provide an overview of the budget development process, the budget summary, including operating and capital budgets, outline the key elements of the 2023-24 manager's recommended budget, and that will include a discussion of our ongoing investments and council priorities, compensation recommendations, additional investment in services, and the capital improvement program highlights. And we'll be concluding with the next steps in the process. Next slide. And as you all know, we usually begin with the end in mind, with key points to remember, especially in this case, since this presentation includes a lot of information and slides. So while revenue growth continues, especially sales taxes, identified needs and departmental budget requests exceed available funding capacity. This fiscal year 2023-24 proposed budget totals $239.7 million with no tax increase or change recommended to the current property tax rate. However, without a property tax increase, balancing the FY24 proposed budget requires unconventional use of our kind of budget reserves or our fund balance. Using this source of revenue, strategic one-time investments are prioritized versus using these funds for recurring expenses in order to minimize impacts on future budgets. Like most budget processes, a lot of time and energy usually goes to identifying new and expanded services and programs. However, the majority of this recommended budget continues to fund existing and traditional services that are delivered by our 17 city departments, as well as other programs and initiatives like the Housing Trust Fund, City County Property Tax Mitigation Program, street outreach for the unsheltered, neighborhood matching grants, litter and cleanliness, and reparations. The new or needed investments being recommended in this budget principally respond to increasing costs. Enhancing the tools or infrastructure is central to efficient and effective service delivery, staff retention and recruitment, council priorities, and community safety needs. As we look ahead to starting a new fiscal year, I am very excited about the opportunity to work with council, staff, and the community to move ahead with the key initiatives recommended in this budget that we believe will improve internal operations, but more importantly, enhance the lives of people who live, work, play, visit, and do business in the city of Asheville. So now I would like to next slide. I would like to turn it over to our budget manager, Taylor Floyd, to provide the details of the proposed FY24 budget. As I mentioned, we have a lot of slides, but we think we can step through this relatively quickly. And Taylor, don't let me down.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As the manager said, I'm Taylor Floyd, our budget manager, and I will try to move pretty quickly through this, but please stop me if you all have any questions. So of course, we want to start with kind of the overview of our process. That process starts with staff in the fall and kind of transitions in the late winter, spring to conversations with you all, culminating in today, the city manager's recommended budget. Where we go from here, we have the budget public hearing, and then adoption in June, and then we will start our new fiscal year July 1st. So just a reminder of some of the times that we have come to you all with some information. We did have 4 council budget work sessions. You all had a retreat in early March. Prior to that, we did do a public comment at a city council meeting on budget priorities in alignment with an online survey. We've come to you all and to the Policy, HR, and Finance Committee several times on fees and charges. And again, all of that work, all of that information that we provided to you all and information that we have received from you all, we think culminates and is reflected in this proposed budget. As we've mentioned before, we have 3 guiding principles, and those essentially are making sure that we can provide the services our community relies on in a cost-effective manner and in alignment with our strategic priorities. Did want to mention, again, that public input that we had earlier in the budget process. We heard from folks here in the council chambers and also from our online survey a number of things, but just wanted to highlight a few items that we think are reflected in this proposed budget. An interest in increased investment in community safety and emergency response, increased investment in water production and distribution, and prioritizing capital investments in roads, sidewalks, and housing. And of course, we also make sure that we are reflecting the priorities that you all refined at your retreat in early March, as listed here. And with that, I will move into a few numbers, starting with kind of a high-level summary of all of our operating funds. As the city manager mentioned, our net total for all operating funds is just under $240 million. You can see the change from our current fiscal year to what we're proposing for next fiscal year in that far right column, with a pretty significant increase in the general fund, about a little over 8%. Increases in water and stormwater that are primarily due to investments and services from fee increases, increased cost to deliver our transit service, and then positive experience in the current year in our parking and civic center funds that we think will continue on into next year. For the general fund, at a high level, we continue to see growth at totaling around $5.4 million in our revenues. That includes normal property tax revenue growth around 2%, continuing strong sales tax growth, and some additional revenue from council-approved fee increases, primarily for the general fund, the sanitation fee. Then on the expense side, we continue to see growth in personnel costs, including adjustments that we're recommending to compensation and benefits. That's the bulk of that $13.3 million. Additional costs include inflation that many people in our community are experiencing, city experiences just the same, and those additional investments that we are recommending. So the difference between those two totals that $7.9 million fund balance appropriation. And as the city manager mentioned, that is a bit unconventional, but it does, that appropriation we believe will still keep you above the policy target of 15% fund balance.
Nice.
Just a broad overview of how that money is in the general fund is divvied up amongst our departments. You can see some of our larger departments. Those departments have lots of employees. Those employees are essential to the service those departments deliver, including our police and fire departments, Parks and Recreation and Public Works. Up there in the top right, you can see the change year over year. And again, those larger departments seeing a lion's share of that increase. So before we get into the additional investments, I did want to take a moment and talk about some ongoing investments. As the manager mentioned, most of that $240 million is going towards services we're already providing. So we wanted to make sure to highlight a number of those by your council goals. So starting with equitable and affordable housing, we have the continuation of our property tax mitigation program that was started after the last property tax revaluation. We have a number of our affordable housing tools and of course our federal funding management that directly goes to affordable housing. We've expanded homelessness strategies a lot over the last several years, including the items you see below. Our street outreach team has grown, our homeless division staffing has grown, and we've included ongoing funding for Code Purple and winter sheltering. We have investments in our neighborhood that include our neighborhood matching grants program, relocating our parks maintenance operations out of the neighborhood, and also a few examples of programs that help us achieve our sustainability goals, including our food scraps drop-off and weatherization programs. We invest a significant amount of resources on improving and expanding core services, both from a capital and an operating maintenance of our infrastructure and facilities. We have some examples of targeted investments that we've made with ARPA funding. And then of course, we're always looking to make technology investments that will help improve and enhance our ability to do our job and provide us with some additional data, for example, that human resources information. On reimagining public safety, we've realigned a number of services to allow APD to focus on their core mission and also provided them with some additional equipment and training to support that as well. And then finally, with reparations, there was an initial $2.1 million investment, and then we have an ongoing $500,000 allocation and of course, continued staff support for the Reparations Commission. So again, that was just some examples of some of the ongoing items that are included in this proposed budget. And I'm going to shift a little bit into some of the newer items, starting with compensation and benefits. We are recommending a variety of adjustments that we believe will help us to recruit and retain employees, especially those hard to fill positions, including in our police department. And we did want to note that these recommendations do meet the Just Economics pledged living wage rate. In fact, they are slightly higher than that minimum set by the pledged rate. As a reminder, looking at our total compensation and benefits package, the city makes a contribution to the state retirement system for all employees. We also provide a 5% 401k contribution to employees, health and dental insurance, and then vacation and sick leave, paid parental and family leave, and 13 city holidays. So looking at our recommendations for changes on the compensation side, an across-the-board salary increase of 5% or 6% for sworn APD positions. A number of additional items that we think really focuses on our ability to, again, recruit and retain employees in those hard-to-fill positions, especially looking at providing some additional incentive for those employees that we're relying on right now that are working those night shifts, that are working on-call, working extra hours, and trying to provide certification for our law enforcement officers. On the benefits side, we are proposing an additional 1% for...
Can you back up to that 24 on the intermediate law enforcement certification? Is that an additional pay for that certification?
Correct.
So, okay, in addition to the other items? Okay,
6%.
thanks.
Yes, yes. So again, on the benefits side, that 1% 401k match, a wellness incentive program for the police department, and then we will be looking to study the cost of medical benefits for retirees so we can better understand the long-term implications of deciding to re-implement a program like that. So that concludes the compensation and benefits portion, so I'll move on to additional new investments. These are organized by service. We thought that would be a clear way to make sure that our community understands kind of why we're making these investments and what services they're impacting. So looking at community safety and emergency response, these are essentially three one-time items that will provide resources for our police and firefighters to do the job that we ask them to do, providing assistance during emergencies, helping to prevent and reduce crime. For community engagement and public information, we believe that an opportunity to upgrade our constituent services position to full-time and also invest in some management software for our boards and commission appointment process will help us provide more and better information for our city and work collaboratively with community members. For our trash and recycling service, we're investing in a solid waste master plan to help guide the future of that service, additional staff to address growth in our community, and a single-use plastics initiative that you all highlighted as a priority related to our sustainability goals. Entertainment programming, we have positions at both the Nature Center and the Civic Center, both of which are at least partially offset by additional revenue to support growth in both of those facilities. And then the McCormick Field project that you all approved earlier in this calendar year. The administration and financial management side, these are really some positions that will help us support our purchasing division, our city attorney's office, and then again, always looking for opportunities to invest in technology that will help us better manage our processes, and in this case, with the fleet management software, provide us some additional information to help achieve our sustainability goals. Looking at investments to preserve and improve city-owned buildings and recreation spaces, we have a position, to support a new building, the Broadway Public Safety Center, additional technology to improve our park maintenance, additional staff at the Civic Center to help with maintenance and event support there, and some additional funding for repairs at the municipal building. All of these, really with an intent to make sure that those facilities remain accessible and available for staff and the community. Sidewalk and roadway maintenance, again, additional technology to help us manage our traffic signal, traffic sign, and pavement markings, as well as the I-26 recommendations from the aesthetic committee that you all approved. In code enforcement and urban planning, design review guidelines to support updated streetscape plans, additional software, or I shouldn't say additional, replacement really of software that will help us improve our customer service related to development services, and an urban forestry master plan to guide the management of our urban tree canopy. For water production and distribution, you all approved fee increases that will help support a variety of investments, including in the maintenance and the distribution system, water treatment plants, communications, customer service, and continued increase in our capital investment. And wanted to make sure that we mentioned that adjustments to the rates and the rate structure in water will be considered mid-year. Once we've completed our consultant study, we'll bring that forth to you all. Stormwater drainage system, we have a number of basic enhancements here. The one I'll point out is that system mapping that will really help guide future capital investments in the stormwater system. As I mentioned earlier, our parking fund revenues have returned to pre-pandemic levels. We're looking to fund an operational study that will help, again, kind of identify where we have opportunities to enhance and grow that service, and also some capital funding to address some immediate needs in the garages. And then for transit, again, we have a significant increase in the cost to just maintain our existing level of service, but we are also investing in a city-county master plan, additional funding to support grant management and the procurement process for a new management company contract that will come up in FY25. Then we've also, in our capital budget, added an additional bus purchase. Of note here, again, is we are using $2 million in ARPA funding that was initially programmed in the current fiscal year for the general fund, but because our revenues, we believe, will exceed our expenses, we don't think we will need to utilize that $2 million, so we're appropriating it here to support the transit service. And then finally, I think this is the last slide on the new investments. We have really the retooling of an existing position to focus on redevelopment of city-owned properties. We think that will hit a number of services we provide, and then the compounding 5% increase in our support of reparations. So to summarize, again, the compensation and benefit changes that I mentioned earlier really do impact all of the services we provide. We are recommending a total of 20 new positions, most of those funded at least in part through fee increases directly tied to those services. We think this budget reflects a focus on basic city services, especially community safety and infrastructure, and of course is in alignment with your priorities. So I'll move on to a brief overview of our capital improvement program. As a reminder, we have a 5-year capital plan. You all will adopt the first year of that plan, the FY24 highlighted in blue there. You can see a rolled up total for our capital plan. The changes or adjustments that have been made from our current plan in the first year, so things that you all will be adopting include the McCormick Field project. If anyone is curious why that number is not $37.5 million, that is because the TDA grant that is going to go towards the McCormick Field project has already been budgeted because that was originally approved for the Cox Avenue project, so we already have that budgeted, so that's why that number's slightly lower.
And why also that it's not showing our $20 million share is because we're partnering, but we're gonna take the debt on ourselves. So partners will help make up that $36 million, but
Correct.
we'll take on the debt.
Correct, yeah, and as we do with any project, whether it's a few $100,000 or multi-million in this case, we typically budget the entire project at the start, knowing that spend will happen over the course of a number of years. Also included in the first year is additional funding for municipal building renovation, the additional bus replacement that I mentioned earlier, and a playground replacement. Changes to the out years, the years 2 through 5 of our capital improvement program include the I-26 Aesthetic Committee recommendations that you all approved earlier this calendar year, an additional apparatus replacement, and some future facility maintenance funds for City Hall.
Taylor, if I may, is that the placemaking line item, these projects that? I've got a question on the previous slide. Yeah.
I believe the I-26 project is probably in the placemaking. I could certainly confirm
Just-
that.
yeah, okay, I'll have a future question about what that,
I wonder if it's under streets and sidewalks too, though, because it's not just placemaking, it's actual,
yeah.
I mean,
I'm mostly curious what makes up the 12.5 million in placemaking next year and the big jumps, but
And all of these are detailed in the
I
budget
just haven't gotten
document.
that far, okay.
well, maybe it is there because it's the big number in the,
It looked like this was starting to add up. Okay,
well, gotta put it somewhere.
That's right.
I mean,
yeah.
I guess.
So I did want to mention, as you all may recall, Walter Ear from our Capital Projects Department at one of our budget work sessions gave you all an update on our comprehensive facility study. That will heavily inform our future capital planning efforts. The facility condition assessment portion of that, I believe, is mostly complete or entirely complete. So we're really kind of working on those second two bubbles now. And as we complete that work, later in this calendar year, we will certainly be bringing forward that information to you all. To wrap up on the capital side, we do have additional needs to maintain our existing facilities and infrastructure, and we are currently working to prioritize investments. The facilities study is an example of that. The parking garage assessment that I mentioned earlier also will factor into that, as will the parks master plan work that is underway. And all of that we will incorporate into developing our 2024 GeoBond referendum. So wrapping up, as a reminder, while our revenue growth continues, especially in sales taxes, as always, our identified needs and requests exceed our available funding. We are not recommending a property tax increase with this proposed budget, but we are balancing the proposed budget with unconventional use of fund balance. We have prioritized strategic one-time investments aligned with that one-time revenue source, and our other investments respond to increased operating costs, infrastructure for essential service, staff retention and recruitment, your priorities, and community safety needs. So next steps, again, we're here today with the proposed budget. We will be at your next meeting for the budget public hearing, and then the meeting after that for council adoption. Any questions?
We have a couple things. Thank you. So I appreciate the staff inclusion of an urban forestry master plan in this budget. We do have a recommendation from the Urban Forestry Commission to join in partnership in the Inflation Reduction Act funding, not just for the urban forestry master plan, but also implementation that could jumpstart our work to repair and maintain the tree canopy. One of the things we talked about in the Thursday agenda briefing is that we are budgeting, if I'm correct, for the whole amount of the forestry master plan, but we may be able to reduce that. Is that correct?
If we get additional information or additional funding.
Okay. And then also on Thursday, we talked a little bit about the impact of fuel costs that's having on transit. I know that this item has veered in and out of the lane. It's always a reminder to me of why we have to invest in hybrid and electric buses, because the fuel cost is not reliable and can impact our budget. So could you reiterate or clarify what percentage of increase from last year's transit budget the fuel is having? If I remember right, you might have said $200,000 impact.
So
We just got a memo
Taylor, we
on
just sent some
Yeah.
information out about that, and I'm
It's-
gonna ask staff if they could quickly find that memo, and then we can get that
Okay.
response to you.
That'd be
in
great. And I just think
2 seconds.
the main goal is that when we're looking at capital improvements for the long haul, investing in an infrastructure that is not only helping us to meet our carbon reduction goals, but also is fiscally a good investment to help us with fuel costs, it would be dual benefit.
Good evening, Rachel Wood. I can just really quickly read through what is included in the memo that was provided to council earlier today. So we included that between FY19 and FY22, fuel expenses have been 3% and 6% of the total transit expenses. The percent increase in the fuel expenses for FY '23, which is the current fiscal year, is estimated to be approximately 23% or $159,000.
Okay, thank you for that. And then the third thing, I brought this to our Policy, Finance, and Human Resources Commission today. I noted that in the presentation, it says that we're looking at the pledged rate for living wages as identified by Just Economics. The pledged rate isn't just $18 an hour, which we've talked about being above. It is also a commitment to a 3% increase plus inflation until the organization or business reaches a living wage rate. So, as I mentioned on Thursday, I did have some conversations with county commissioners about recruiting and retention across pay scale. And what some cities are noting is that while we're working to recruit and retain for quality, equitable service outcomes, a lot of times what can happen is we focus on filling positions, which means the focus is on overtime, which causes organizations to completely burn out their staff and they leave. And it can have the opposite impact of recruiting and retention when you focus on boosting overtime. So I share that concern. My other concern is that by not keeping up with the base rate of other municipal employers in our community, namely the county, we could lose even more of our dedicated staff. So the living wage rate being 2010 is based on the 4-year average of cost of housing in Buncombe, Haywood, and Madison counties. So we already acknowledge that people are living farther away. We're also looking at a 4-year average, so we can expect that this is going to continue to go up every single year because the cost of housing is going up. So while I appreciate that we're getting ready to bring this back to our strategic priority goal setting, we still have some unfinished work to do with council. My hope is that we consider meeting businesses and orgs in our community that are pledging not just to the $18 an hour commitment, but also to that 3% increase and inflation increase. And my hope is that we would look at onboarding that over a period of time and look at projections instead of just responding year to year. If we don't onboard with the goal of living wages based on the cost of housing, then I think we are going to have to seriously offboard our commitments to quality of life services. And I don't want to see that happen. I don't think any one of us wants to see us fail at delivering water and trash and public safety. But I think that if we don't look at recruiting and retention at the lowest rate, we are going to fail, and I don't want us to fail. So my ask is that we bring this back, not only at the council commitment to finish up our strategic priorities, but then look at a projection of how long it's going to take us to meet the gap. So I'm just reiterating what we talked about today at Policy and Finance and my hope for our council conversation.
So we did talk about this at Policy and Finance today and discussed when we reconvene to sort of finish our retreat and come up with our goals, that Councilwoman Romney could suggest this if it's not already included in the list of 71.
Did we have, I'm sorry, excuse me, Mayor. I didn't get a chance to watch that committee meeting. Did you come up with a number?
No,
a cost?
no, just basically that conversation you just heard.
Just a projection. It may take us a step every 6 months, or essentially we just need a staff recommendation of looking at how far the gap is. If we're already above 18, it's like 1855 at the lowest rate. What would it take us to fill the gap while also projecting that there's going to be inflation?
Well, and yeah, I mean, I think what I heard you say was getting, kind of just working on this continuously as each year rolls on, because it's a conversation every year during the budget cycle, and then it becomes this complicated, how do we deal with compression? How do we deal with what's the full fiscal impact? Do we know that now? Do we have to go analyze that? So to get ahead of that conversation and just have it proactively ongoing so that by the time we're in a budget cycle, we are ready and we know what the number is.
Additionally, we should be ready if we do have cost savings, like every penny pinching that we can do throughout the year, or if there's increased sales tax revenue, be prepared to close the gap.
And I would also appreciate ideas about what we need to cut.
Yeah, no, I mean,
If
it
we're gonna
definitely,
get to
yeah,
whatever
again,
rate is.
it's not lack of will of this council. We would like to fund our employees for the hard work that they do for our city, more than what we're including in this budget. It is, we are already using fund balance to balance this year's budget. So we would have to make cuts. We may have to cut positions, but that's not what this budget direction is. In fact, it's adding 20 positions in the city. So So I resist the framing that that somehow the council doesn't support paying employees more than what we're even proposing here in this budget. But I think over the last few years, we've tried to be really aggressive in raising employee pay because cost of living is going up, because jobs are so hard to fill, and it's very competitive out there. And it's hard work. So we definitely value our employees and want to pay them what they deserve to be paid and what they need to be paid to be able to afford to live in our community, with balancing that with trying not to raise taxes on folks who are also trying to live in our community and make this community affordable for them to live here. So it's always a balancing act. But I do appreciate having that conversation earlier, having that analysis done earlier, so we know what it's going to be, what it's going to take, and then be able to make those hard decisions about, are we making cuts? Are we raising taxes? What are we doing to close the gap?
It's hard to track as well. I mean, we're guessing at what the future housing costs will be and when it'll plateau. I agree that we should probably have some idea of what it's going to take to get there, but that it's going to be a moving target. And technically this year's fund balance use is a product of last year's good planning and budgeting, right? So we ended up with some net revenue that we're moving into now using. So we might be able to better strategize over time. But yeah, so I support looking at it long-term. I don't think we're gonna be able to do anything right now or this budget cycle or potentially even next. I'm nervous, but we should be looking at it.
I also want to just commend staff because we did see some of those numbers at the very first budget session on May 13th. So
Yeah.
they were able to say,
Yeah.
okay, we just learned what the living wage prices were. We didn't have the new living wage price until early March. And so I just want to acknowledge that I think that staff was really responsive once we got the information. And we know this is a priority of this council, so how do we financially plan ahead with information that's a moving target and look to the future of it?
I have a couple other questions. I think they'll just be for maybe reporting on in the future as follow-up or next meeting. But I was kind of curious, page 15 talks, one of the housing initiatives was improved housing funding coordination with the county. I'm just not clear what that is. I'd love more information. Doesn't have to be right now. And then I was curious if the 1.5 million increase in parking is mostly personnel. And if there is any update on how that might impact the transit fund, because it was giving $1 million to transit. I'm not sure if that's still happening or if that got lost in the shuffle.
That one, so in the parking fund, there are certainly additional personnel. There are no new positions included,
Okay.
but for example, like they're one of the departments that utilizes the shift differential because they have folks that work overnight, as well as, again, all of the
Gotcha.
other items that we're including in our recommended changes. The other portion of that, I think, would be the additional capital that we're
I wondered.
putting in. We could certainly find out the specifics of the other items, but those are the two that come to mind off the top of my head. And it is not exactly $1 million, but it's 900 and something thousand that is still going.
So it's still happening. We didn't lose that in the shuffle of the downsides. Okay, good. And then the placemaking and those big numbers in the upcoming years, I'd love to hear some more detail on that at the next session.
Get those projects for you.
And then just maybe a little clarity you might be able to address now. I wanted to make sure I heard you correctly about the $2 million in ARPA that's going to cover the transit gap. That was money that we originally designated for transit improvements that we didn't utilize, or this is different pots of?
Yeah, so we did last year utilize both some transit-specific ARPA funding as well as some of our general ARPA, $26.2 million. I think that's the right number.
There was some specifically just for transit outside the 26.2, right?
So we utilized a combination of those two things to fund the transit service in the current fiscal year. That $2 million, I think it's actually $2,008,000 that is budgeted.
69 cents, yeah.
It's budgeted this year in the general fund, and I would have to double check, but I'm not sure that we had a specific use intended
Okay.
for that. It was just kind of a like.
I knew there was
General
some left
operations.
over.
Yeah.
Okay, because
So-
there was a number left, right, that we might still have. I just want to make sure I wasn't using that.
And that does continue to maintain the, I believe, $1.6 million of ARPA funding. That's still
1.2,
available.
yeah, okay, perfect.
For, I believe that was for a shelter.
Perfect, okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Because that was said so quietly, I heard you say 1.6 million that we had earmarked for,
To support a shelter.
Potentially,
No,
Potentially.
Yeah.
potentially,
Potentially.
we saved some money for some future potential needs.
That's correct.
This would exhaust those
But
funds.
It does exhaust
So,
those funds.
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, that was my question. So it doesn't exhaust them?
Does not.
That's what I'm saying.
We still got 1.6.
It does not exhaust
Is
the
that what
funds,
you're
okay.
saying?
All right, good.
Be clear. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, okay. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to make sure everyone's clear that this is kind of this really long process where we have 1 million meetings on the budget, but this is the presentation, and the official public comment on the budget actually happens at the next meeting, which is the statutorily required public hearing on the budget that has to take place however many days before the vote on the budget. So, but I see a lot of people are here and I know they want to talk about the budget. We will be taking public comment as usual at the end of the meeting, so you're free to make comments at that time. And I don't have a question for you, but I did want to say that I know there's been a lot of discussion and question and concern around public safety pay, and efforts to enhance public safety and cleanliness. And I'm glad that we're finally able to be at a place where we're seeing a lot of activity in our community, and thank you, Deborah Campbell, for steering the ship on that. And we're seeing monies in this budget to address a lot of those concerns, and it's been it's been a real challenge to get back on track, if I had a way to categorize it. And we're not there yet, but this council is really working with the administration to try to make a great effort to try to restore some of what we lost during the pandemic and post-pandemic period. And we're going to hear a little more about that tonight. Some of us have had the opportunity to meet with the Police Benevolent Association, to meet with the police chief and with the manager around the conversation around staffing and pay for officers. And yeah, you
I was going
keep
to see
standing
if
there.
I can get to that slide.
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight, I know that there is a lot of questions and concerns around that. The numbers that you see in this budget from just the salary standpoint, my understanding are supported by, you want to keep working on getting to the slide? I thought you were talking about the one that had the different,
the list of all the adjustments, but I also just wanted to point out that with APD, there's almost a $4 million increase in their budget.
in
and
their
that
overall
is
budget.
unprecedented.
Slide
as well.
24.
So, yes, if you
Yeah.
can go to the benefits.
You're so good at clicking.
So, yeah, very good. Okay, so one of the things to note about this slide and why this is important is that, yes, it provides a 6% across the board pay increase for officers, but also that shift differential is an increase in pay. If you work nights, for example, right now you get 75 cents more an hour to work nights. And so this will bump folks that work nights, not just in APD, but in APD as well, to an additional $2 a night. And the on-call pay, which is where you're on call, will be increased as well. And that intermediate law enforcement certification is very important because that will provide an increase in pay for those that have that certification. It's my understanding a lot of folks do have that certification. And the critical staffing supplement. So if we were to add this all up and look at the dollar impact on individual employees in the department, it is not just 6%. So I just want to make that clear. so that when you package it all together, the real pay raise to that employee, what they will actually experience in their paycheck will be more than that in all likelihood, and could be significantly more, depending on your position. So I just wanted to make that clear, because it's a little bit difficult to see all that in this presentation, but when we were meeting with the PBA and the chief, all that was explained to us, why that mattered and why we should put it together in this format. And I think the other thing, in case anyone missed it, that we are looking at is this issue about health insurance and retirement. So the city of Asheville stopped providing health insurance and retirement for employees several years ago. So new hires after, I believe it was 2012, before that you'd be grandfathered, but after 2012, I think it was, you would no longer get health insurance if you reach full retirement. And that is a decision a lot of employers have had to make. The state of North Carolina has made that change. But we're re-examining that. We're not making any promises that that's something that we could reinstitute. We don't know what the fiscal impact is, but we're looking at it. I think we recognize that the employment landscape has changed drastically in the last 3-4 years. Employees have a lot of choices and options. They don't necessarily want or need to work for a city. They don't necessarily want or need to be a police officer. So if we're going to be able to attract and retain employees, we got to kind of look at everything. We need to look at the total picture. So we're making our best effort to do that. So we heard what the list of asks were and worked through that list, and I think a good deal of it is incorporated here. And what I mean there more is, the list from the chief, to the manager when she's putting together a budget, as well as advocacy groups like the PBA who advocate on behalf of the officers. So hopefully that helps fill out that picture a little bit more on public safety. This is a priority for our city. We appreciate our law enforcement officers and the service they provide to our city. We've heard from a lot of you about how much you appreciate it. We've heard how important it is to see law enforcement officers in our community, the feeling of safety that people get from that especially in our downtown area, and as well for all of our crews, whether they're our fire department's rolling out a community paramedic program. Hopefully you'll see them out and about, and our efforts around cleanliness and public works and improving streets, sidewalks, parks. We're on a roll, and I hope this momentum keeps up. It's super challenging, got to make all these numbers work. But I think the will of this council is to move us in a very positive direction, and I want to thank you very much for your leadership, Ms. Campbell, and your staff for hearing us and what our concerns are and figuring out how to make that actionable. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I echo those appreciations. You really did hear us. I feel like some of those ideas came live from these meetings, and I'm thankful you were able to prioritize them and get them in so quickly. And yeah, I'm thankful to see that both the staff and the council, and it looks like more and more community members are gaining in support for our public safety initiatives. And yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. Sometimes it takes us a little time for us to get organized, because we don't want to, and you all hear this from me all the time, don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And so we like to kind of get our act together, because we don't like to also not have this be an organizational effort, because community safety is the community's responsibility. Yes, City of Asheville has a role, a significant role, but we got to do this together. And sometimes that takes a little bit more planning. But we certainly appreciate the support of council, for obviously our staff. And this concludes our presentation on the budget. And again, thank you all.
Thank you.
We have lots of presentations and reports tonight, so I'm gonna
Sports
turn it over to you,
Commission.
Deborah. We're gonna hear from Chris Campbell about the sports. Chris Coral.
What'd you call
I
it?
don't know. I'm
Chris
blending their names. Chris, Deborah.
Hi, hi all, Chris Coral with the Regional Entertainment Facilities Department. First, apologies for a tire. I thought I was gonna be late and ran over and didn't change after loading for our show today. So here to talk about the Asheville Sports Commission. So some key takeaways that we'll get to throughout this process is that the Asheville Buncombe Regional Sports Commission is a 501c3 currently funded by the TDA, the county, and the city governments. The founding members, which include the city, elected last summer to evaluate the current structure of the Sports Commission. And consultant recommendations have come in, and the key takeaway from all of the recommendations is that the consultant recommends absorbing the Sports Commission staff into the TDA. No actions requested today. This is an update to council on the study. But items that we're going to want to discuss in the future include evaluation of the current city funding for the Sports Commission, items that we may think that need to be included in any future new bylaws, and event ownership and risk. So a little history on this Sports Commission. It was founded in 2010 by the City of Asheville, Buncombe County Tourism Development Authority, and the University of North Carolina, Asheville, the founding members. The initial funding structure was $50,000 per entity plus in-kind use of facilities from UNC Asheville. An initial staffing structure for the organization was one full-time position and a part-time position that helped around the Southern Conference Championships. And it was initially built to bring the SoCon back to Asheville and execute that event. Current structure, now about 12 years later, the city and county both put in $45,000 per year, which is 15% each in their operating budget. And the TDA puts in $230,000 a year, which is about 70% of the operating budget. UNCA still provides in-kind use of facilities for Sports Commission events. Their staffing structure has grown to 3 full-time people. One's vacant at the moment. And in the last 11 years, they've hosted 53 major sporting events, many more than 53, but of the majors, 53 in Buncombe County, 83% on city property, and 62% at our venue, the Harris Cherokee Center. So the mission of the Sports Commission, they will identify and attract sports events and related meetings to enhance the health, wellness, and quality of life for area residents and sports enthusiasts, and will generate a positive economic impact by promoting our region as a recognized sporting destination. And their vision statement is to host memorable sporting events that will enrich the lives of athletes and spectators. So they promote a lot of events. It's not just SoCon. For those in the community that know of the Sports Commission, they think it's just the SoCon, but they're involved with youth sporting events, adult amateur sport tournaments, high school tournaments, NCAA basketball and wrestling in the past. They've assisted with professional tennis events that we host and amateur tennis events, 5K, half marathons, bike races. We used to have a Spartan race pre-COVID over in Black Mountain. That was a huge event every July. And a lot of people's favorite, cornhole tournaments. So in 2022 only, I just picked the most recent calendar year, the Sports Commission was involved with 21 events. There's a $19.2 million direct spend in Buncombe County, $31.5 million economic impact to Buncombe County, and about $950,000 in local taxes generated from their events. They provided free access to basketball and tennis events and camps to a little over 4,500 elementary and middle school kids. And this past year started a program of going pro in sports that resulted in $5,000 in scholarships to local high school students. So there's a pretty good return on investment for us as the city. We put in $45,000 in cash to their operations annually. We also provide some traffic management free of cost for the Southern Conference Basketball Championships. From Thursday's briefing to now, I only had access to Harrah's revenue specifically, so there's more in event parking and others, but Sports Commission events, just in 2022, we brought in almost $650,000 gross, so it's a pretty good ROI. So the reasoning behind requesting a consultant review of the Sports Commission, there was some financial stability concerns coming out of COVID, and where funding sources might come for the future to help continue the nonprofit. There's a vacancy in the executive director. We're about 1 year in with an interim executive director. And then really a conversation for the future and how can the commission grow and expand. So the consultant study. After an RFP process, the Huddle Up group was selected. Sports Commission was involved in selection as well as the 4 founding members. And Huddle Up Group was directed to assess the current structure and bylaws, analyze the current funding model, optimize the board and staff structure, and identify any critical relationships for future success. Huddle Up conducted a lot of stakeholder engagements. I want to say it was about 20 phone calls, 1 town hall meeting, and a survey went out that they collected information from to do their report. So we get into the recommendations. As we go forward here, the red is the recommendations, the black is just some comments on it. So first and foremost, staff of Asheville Buncombe Regional Sports Commission should become part of the auspice of Explore Asheville, the TDA. So TDA is participating in this process along with the other founding members, future listening sessions, and they're considering the recommendations at the moment. The nonprofit status of the Sports Commission should remain the same with bylaws rewritten. So Huddle Up Group's contract has funding available for them to rewrite the bylaws if the founding members request that rewrite, and founding members have the abilities to suggest some suggestions as to what would go into those bylaws. Founding members' annual support would continue, but it would go to the nonprofit entity in this structure. So we would still be sending our economic development money to the nonprofit. Next recommendation is a suggestion to reorganize the Board of Governance, which is currently 4 seats, the founding members, to be expanded to 7. So they're suggesting adding an economic development leader seat, a corporate community leader seat, and then a chair of what on this slide is called the advisory board. I didn't have a chance to update this, but it really should be the Asheville Buncombe Regional Sports Commission's, the nonprofit board. And that would be the chair of that, which right now is Steven Zubrard. Next recommendation is continuation of that nonprofit board. Again, it says advisory, but it should be nonprofit board. That board is structured with 4 seats being appointed, 1 by each founding member, and then up to 21 additional seats appointed. Currently, there's 18 seats filled. And then last set of recommendations, short-term goals, which are pretty significant here. A goal of driving $20 million in new economic impact to the destination annually through hosting of events, renew 4 annual events, 2024 and beyond, create 1 new event per year to replicate past success. Those are some of the Sports Commission owned, operated events. Secure events that will attract at least 30,000 new room nights, and specifically off-peak season in 24, 25, and 26. Execute an annual recognition event, and provide access to sports camps and clinics for 100 underserved youth in our community each year, and to commission an economic impact study to show the value of sports tourism in Buncombe County. So there's some pros and cons to this, as there is with everything, and this list could be a lot more extensive. I tried to get to the major pros, cons. Financial stability and administrative support are probably the #1 positive of this. If the staff of the Sports Commission is paid by the TDA benefits and they have that administrative support, that's time off of those 2 employees currently. A clearer definition of the role of sports tourism sales can be created. Rewritten bylaws are always a good thing to update. It's been 12 years. A more transparent founding member board structure is definitely a bonus of this. And right now it's even numbers, so you have the ability for a 50-50 vote, which a 7-member board you would avoid. There's long-term growth potential in economic impact and in the organization. It's a lot greater just because TDA has some significant funding, as we all know, and so the ability to grow that is there. And it should strengthen the partnership between the TDA and the Sports Commission. Some negatives that come with it, securing sponsorship might be harder. If you're out in the Asheville community and your email says @exploreasheville.com, it might be a lot harder to generate a sponsorship for an event than at ashevillesports.org, for example. There's volunteerism concerns. I can speak from the tennis events that we've held here at the Harris Center. We've had over 140 volunteers, I want to say it is, for each given tennis event that are all rallied up for, controlled, managed, and everything by the nonprofit. Again, same thing, if it's the TDA, it could be a lot harder to get volunteers. That's just really an unknown more than anything. Less control by the volunteer nonprofit board. In the structure as listed in the consultant report, there would be less control there, and it would be more on that 7-member board, which could be a concern. Potential shift in event logistics and risk, that would be a concern as well. Right now, for example, there's all these sports commission events, they help execute the logistics of the event. In some cases, the sports commission is the at-risk partner, so if the event loses money, it's the sports commission that loses money, not the facility that the event is hosted at, for example. And the last one, there have been rumblings over the last 2 years of regionalizing the sports commission, like growing it through Henderson County, Madison County, Transylvania, since we are the economic hub and they don't have those abilities as a way to grow. And it would be unlikely to regionalize if it were within the TDA, because it would be functioning within the county, just like they do for hotel rooms. So items to consider, short and long-term staffing plan is definitely something to get into. Initial and goal of future operating budget. The continuation and growth of the local focused youth programming opportunities, that's both clinics, camps, youth and high school tournaments, for example. Continuation and growth of jobs and sports programming and training opportunities. That Going Pro in sports that I mentioned earlier that had the $5,000 in sponsorships. Those kids at local high schools here also had speaking engagements from individuals in the industry from across the country, had jobs related to the Asheville Championships basketball tournament last fall, worked in advance of that tournament, and then worked at the actual tournament to get some experience, and then had the opportunity for a scholarship. We should evaluate the current city funding that goes to the Sports Commission every year. And the new board, that 7-member board, those 3 additional seats, should it be 7? Should it be 9? Are the types of seats that we would prefer, for example? And then the big one is event ownership and risk. Who assumes the responsibility of the risk for the events that they own or co-own? Which Sports Commission owns the SoCon currently. There's a high school wrestling event every December that we, the venue, co-own with the Sports Commission. And we have done one-off events in the past with them, but those are the only 2 that are currently owned or co-owned. But we've done other basketball events and similar that there's been a risk component with them. So back to those key takeaways. They're currently a 501c3. The founding members last summer elected to go through this process. These are the recommendations of that consultant's process. So none of this is a done deal until a future vote of the founding members. And no actions requested tonight, but it would be good to discuss some of those key items we've gone through. And I should note, I was able to confirm late this afternoon, there is no scheduled vote for the founding members at this time. So there's not a really tight deadline like we thought Thursday. There is time to discuss a little bit more.
Meaning they are moving it beyond May.
Yes, there's no May vote at this time, to my understanding. So, questions?
Yes. Okay, the first question I have, Chris, is you spoke about some of the risk there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you spoke earlier about the rewriting of the bylaws. So basically, by rewriting the bylaws, you could probably identify and mitigate some of those risks, right?
Not necessarily. When I say risk, I mean for like the basketball tournament for itself. Like if we don't sell enough tickets to cover expenses, and there's more expenses than revenue, who covers the extra expenses? That's what I mean when I'm talking about risk. So not like liability risk, but financial risk on the events
Who covers
themselves.
it now?
Right now, the Sports Commission covers it. For the Southern Conference Championships, for the Grapple, which we co-own, we would 50-50 any loss at the moment.
So in other words, it would actually help them financially if they don't cover the risk, if someone else is responsible, would it not?
Yeah, in theory, but it's not clear if the CVB would cover that risk if they went under the CVB, or if it would still be the nonprofit, or if it would have to fall within the city. I think that's still
Well, see, that's what I was
worked out.
talking about, the rewriting of certain rules, regulations, bylaws, or how it would actually.
I don't think that would fall in the
You don't think it
bylaws
would?
per se.
But
Okay.
under potentially
But-
MOU.
MOU, yeah,
Yes,
something
in-
like
in an
that. Yeah, that's what
MOU.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you, Sage. Yeah, something like that, because I'm looking at some of the things that you stated, and like I said, I think that those can be worked out within the committee or commission itself, where it could give some resolution to some of these issues. And I will say, just looking at it and just sort of getting more information, I'd like to ask you too, are there any other cities that sort of have this plan or utilize this?
Yeah, I don't know the breakdown all the way through, but essentially 71% of sports commissions, I think was the number, it's around 70, are inside of a CVB. And then the remainder 30% are anywhere independent to within a municipal government. I think there's a couple of oddballs in there too, but it's not abnormal. It's
Okay.
just different for us because ours has been independent as a nonprofit.
But the
since
majority
its
actually
founding.
do utilize it. The only reason I was concerned about this is because the city is growing in so many different ways, and it's almost like you almost have to partnership in different, just like we're doing, everybody's bridging out and partnering because it's so much more effective as far as the growth and being able to spread the responsibilities and risk, as opposed to having it in-house. So, and that was the reason I was asking about, TDA does have the money. They can advertise, they can get it up. And I didn't realize that the position, they only had 2 positions in the sports commission. 3, well, 3 now, and still one's vacant all this time. And I just think with the working together, I think they could actually do something to move the needle as far as our sports here, because we are definitely hurting in the area of sports activity here in this city as opposed to most cities that I visit. And that's always been a concern of mine, even from the beginning. And I didn't know really why, but now after looking at some of the information that you've shared with us, I can understand.
Well, and so the staff does like an amazing job for how few of them there are and like what they get done. I would say a bigger hindrance than the number of staff in the sports commission to our ability for sports tourism just in general is the facilities. So we don't have enough soccer fields, enough baseball fields. Basketball arena was built in the 70s. Like we've got a lot of things that we have to work through. We don't have pickleball courts, as you guys know. So there's opportunities and facilities too, but it's growing marketing, growing the staff themselves to execute. We can build our own events instead of attract events, which is a big key to partnering locally and regionally on the tourism side with the types of events we have.
And one other question, then I'll let you go. When you talked about the risk of being able to grow regionally, could you sort of elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is just discussion that's been happening over the last year or 2, I guess, at this point, but there's a lot of sports facility growth happening down in Henderson County right now. Madison County is considering some. The casino over in Cherokee has built an entire convention center that has a wing that's like dedicated for sports, but nobody to sell these assets out there. And so there's an opportunity for regionalism that would still benefit Asheville, even if there's a big tourism event that happens in Hendersonville, for example. And so the ability to get funding from other partners to regionalize is currently there, would likely go away inside the CVB. But also there's not very many regional sports commissions that are multi-county, so it would also be abnormal. So the likeliness, is up in the air, but it's a thing that could happen, right?
Have we started to take any steps towards that regional? Like, are we cutting off something that's already in motion?
Not something that's already in motion, just really loose conversations.
Okay.
And I don't even know if they've been had with other governments at this point.
Okay.
I have a couple things, and I'm really eager to hear what others have to say, so I'll try to be quick. We're having national and even global conversations about sports business ecology right now, looking into the structures and hierarchy of systems, quite literally, who's making the money and whose labor is being exploited. We also have an opportunity here in Asheville and Western North Carolina to do what I see as 2 big things. Do better resource mapping, which we're talking about, and ensure community benefits that include youth connections to our sports ecosystem. So with resource mapping, when I heard you say something about what Henderson is doing and what Cherokee is doing, or Harris is doing, I'm really worried about duplicating. I see that kind of happening in our own community. When I was on the UNCA campus this week and I saw flyers up around graduation time asking to help raise funds for the new track. And I was like, we're building 2 new tracks at the same time. That's awesome. So what does that ecosystem for track look like so as people are leveling up? So what can we do to work with our partners to ensure we maintain facilities and address gaps? I thought I was going to be wild by saying like pickleball, but you already said it, so it's out there in the world. I think of the Grant Center pool, which was at one point considered for Olympic level swimming. which could have been part of a facilities and programming part of a bigger swim system. And I know that that's another issue that's been addressed as far as for people, maybe non-male identifying athletes that want to level up and take things to the Olympic level. So I want to look and see if we could bring our voice to the table and not duplicating. And it sounds like, what are the limitations of moving to a regional conversation and simultaneously talking about resource mapping?
I'll do the second question first because it's a little easier. A long-term goal that was in that report was to do a facility master plan and a review of all the facilities we have. Because you're right, Greensboro has a really great aquatic center. There's no reason for us to build one, but there's not a really good indoor track. Well, Winston now has an indoor track, but there's another example somewhere. There's not a big pickleball complex, whatever, right? So we should plan regionally on that aspect. Now, as far as regionalization, like you mentioned, that's multiple government entities all getting on the same page at the same time to do something, and that was pretty hard just with the baseball
We
stadium
tried to merge
here.
our Parks and Rec department and
Yeah, so I mean, that's like a huge, long-term lift, so I don't know how realistic it is, but, there's always possibilities, right? And when
Would
people are
that
investing.
master plan look at our programming demands? Because I'm thinking about, like, even when we have a new facility, but then there's multi-layered infrastructure issues, like, say, parking. If there's multiple groups trying to use the same parking infrastructure, there can be, are we looking at the whole system? Could the master plan look at that?
It depends what's asked for, they typically do, but there's no RFP created for it, like, it's just, this is a long-term goal of doing that, but it can be whatever we would want to ask for, but it would be in partnership with the founding members, I would imagine, or at this sports commission's direction. They did a semi-facilities study 5 or 6 years ago, but it wasn't as in-depth. It was really just to show the need to help with future product development fund grants.
And then the second thing is that part about connecting our locals, especially our youth. I think about programming priorities and proximity to it being in your neighborhood. And then when you also look at, nerding out this week, the long term of salaries over the course of a career in correlation to which industries in sports have the most injuries. And there are reasons locally that I see folks that are stepping into really major careers because of their proximity to the sports, whether it's from our schools to the major leagues, like being able to make sure that we identify the gap in our whole ecosystem. I see this new information as an opportunity really to stay at the table for some of these conversations around community benefits. The Sports Commission could immediately make the implementation of more board members happen. Reviewing the bylaws could be, an immediate thing. But this, it really feels like staying at the table is a positive.
It does. I'm curious, this whole regional concept we're talking about right now. So the tourist stadium is coming to mind because it's a big need in the community, supports regional customers and residents. And the organizations that came together to fund it were a handful, us included. But if we're talking about more facilities and we're not in a regional partnership, we may find ourselves with just those 3 funding agencies, ourselves, the county, the TDA, available to do these facility fund, right? I hadn't really thought about that until tonight.
well, unless we can find,
Other-
like a partnership like we have with ABYSA. I mean, we have an agreement with them where they carry financial responsibility, but
Yeah.
you'd have to find something unique like that.
Right.
I'm also I'm surprised I haven't heard more about this, but if the focus is on creating more big events that bring in tourist dollars, what's the competition for the local uses? I know that's gonna happen every single time that we build something new, everyone's gonna wanna use it, and I get that. New Greenway, we wanna use it, new track, we wanna use it. What will the impact be on the people who had anticipating it being used in their neighborhood the way that they imagined? So while we're focusing on new events, I hope there would be a balance of focus on community benefits, and that's one of the things I would hope that we would carry forward.
So, may I piggyback on you? I had a question. So earlier you mentioned something like 70% of places utilize this proposed model. Initially, I assumed that means 30% are doing the way we do it. Are there any other areas that have a more hybrid approach? Because my initial question was, does currently the TDA produce events?
No.
So there are
And-
hybrids, but currently, no, the TDA does not produce events.
Okay, so follow up to that question, will they produce events?
That is
in
to
the
be
structure?
determined. It would be assumed, yes, but we have not figured that out exactly. We
So
haven't
in
seen
the
a proposed
interim,
budget yet.
what do we do as the city? Are we prepared to fill in that gap until we have that knowledge? Or could we potentially, as we're talking about the budget, I know you hate last minute things, a position within the city
But we don't,
that handles,
one problem you said is
smaller
we don't
ones.
own the sports. We don't, some of them we don't own, right? I mean, if we're trying to
Right.
preserve,
well, I'm saying
Maybe we
McCormick Field, could we maintain control of sporting events or whatever that go there?
Well, McCormick, we could, because that lease isn't finalized yet, so we could take control of all non-baseball sports. So at Harrah's, there's cheerleading, gymnastics, wrestling, multiple basketballs, occasional tennis, probably missing one, cornhole. So we might not own all of them, but we help execute them. So there is execution that happens on our side. In all of those cases, there's something that the Sports Commission does. A great example for Asheville Championships, it's owned by a for-profit promoter out of Chicago, but the Sports Commission's on the ground for months in advance, selling sponsorships or securing the halftime acts, volunteers, copiers for stats people, like all these little things. And if they were not doing that, yeah, we would need a body of some sort to make that happen, because we're kind of already maxed at our ability to support from the venue side. We could grow it if we had the people to grow it, but like we don't have that ability right now. So if that went away, we would need some additional help, either contractor or full-time person, like pretty immediately. Our first big event with the Sports Commission this coming year is first weekend in November, which is the NCAA basketball tournament.
can I ask you, just sort of, this is, what I understand is being contemplated is an MOU, a memorandum of understanding that's technically between the Sports Commission and the TDA. So we're not
Yes.
a direct party to it, but we're obviously greatly impacted because these 83% of the events, or whatever you said, happen on our facilities. So, I mean, I think one of the things that we're really struggling with is there's all these unanswered questions. Would there be a possibility for us to ask for this to be fleshed out? Could we see a draft of the MOU? Could we, I know we've got some concerns around continuation of community benefits that we realize from the Sports Commission now that we'd like to see continued. And I think Maggie might have a few items that she could list that I'm not remembering off the top of my head. We have these cherished local events that we love, like SoCon and other events that happen, and we'd hate to see those disappear because they don't produce enough heads in beds. SoCon probably does, but some of the other ones, maybe they don't fit the model for the heads in beds or kind of just the purely number crunching, but there are cherished events. So it would greatly comfort me if we could see what the plan is. If we could see what the MOU looks like, what's the 5-year plan? Are they gonna staff up and we're gonna have the opportunity to have more great events at Harrah's? That might be great. Let's see what that looks like. Or would they take a different course and do something that looks very different and not, I don't know. I guess what I'm struggling with is I'd hate to make this decision and then we lose a lot of these things that we're enjoying so much and we don't have any control and then all the things that you talked about that I don't think a lot of people realize in terms of benefits to folks that live here who are exploring opportunities in sports as careers or whatever the case may be. So I know we don't have a lot of leverage because we can't demand anything, and I'm not suggesting, but if there is more time, like you're saying, and maybe there's not a great sense of urgency, it'd be great to kind of see the plan before we can really assess whether this is yes, a good thing or not a good thing?
I think with no scheduled vote, there's definitely that opportunity now, because it's not like it even got pushed back 2 weeks, it's just not scheduled currently, so there's opportunity for that. And I guess I should note, I think I skipped over this earlier, so the CVB has, through the Product Development Fund, put in about 38 million since 2001, I want to say, in sport-related facilities that the city owns, or Buncombe County and city owns, so they're definitely invested in this as well. So it's a partnership conversation of the city, the county, the TDA, and the Sports Commission, and all three of our entities have separate MOUs with the Sports Commission. So getting those all aligned to have similar goals is going to take a little bit of time, but possible, right?
The place where I'm glad you just mentioned on the goals, is when I looked at the goal slide 16, I saw really thoughtful strategy for the ultimate mission of the entity wherever it lives around economic development, which I think is good. But I felt like it was a little thin on the community benefit. So I keep hearing my councilwoman mention that, you know, I've been to some events and I've seen well more than 100 youth participate. And so part of what I'd be interested in, you know, I don't need to know as much about the mechanics of how we're going to get there, but if these are the agreed upon goals, I have some assumptions that it's probably going to take more staff than they have now. What does that look like? But I would love to see goals in here about youth programming. I look at a lot of this and I make assumptions that a lot of the humans involved in reaching these goals might not live in Asheville or Buncombe County. And so I would love to see what type of goals we would have to make sure that events are mutually beneficial to any visitor as well as Ashevilleans and Buncombe Countyans. So that would be a place where if we are having more time, I'd love to learn kind of what the goal metrics are for community benefit. So just kind of echoing what several of my lady councilwomen are saying.
And I would say, in addition to that, one of the things I learned through the McCormick Field process is that it's our field. We could use it more often if we had a better agreement in place. So we could have gospel nights, we could have dollar movie nights, but we had kind of left that sitting on the table because we were in our own way. So if we have a way to show to the community that we care about family-friendly, affordable events by getting a better deal because we maintain a seat at the table, there may be less pushback when there's going to be a big event if we're using our spaces more effectively for the people who live here.
Yeah, you could even consider like an extension of Parks and Rec, right?
Exactly.
The sports focus,
And
essentially.
it does state here on slide 18, the items of consideration would basically include some of the things that we're talking about, further discussion, and maybe coming up with some workable solutions.
But I'd like it explicit.
Yeah, and like mirroring that, like if this is what some of the considerations, so what's the goal so that we all are
Exactly.
rowing in that same
Exactly.
direction?
And this is a staff presentation, this isn't from
Yeah.
the study. Yeah, so our
Yeah.
goals, right, these aren't,
Yeah.
yeah, if
Yeah.
that wasn't clear, yeah.
So this is the staff saying that
Yeah.
these are things we need to consider. So that's why I
Yep.
said they've already taken consideration some of this.
And we can work with the Sports Commission on what that could look like in the future if they had whatever, X budget, X staff, this is what we think we can realistically do for room nights and for youth programming and all the way across.
Because I think as I've been out listening and talking with folks in the community, I think I'm hearing concern about where this lives. And I think that's people doing due diligence, and I think that's appropriate. And from the role that I sit at, I want to know about how we're going to grow our community. And I see clearly some of the thoughts around economic development, which is great, but I'd like to see more on what does it do for the average Ashevillean. Like this past weekend, there's a youth dance competition. I took my 9-year-old and my mom. We just made like a whole imaginary dreams come true for my kiddo. Like that type of thing. I'm not kidding. She was like dancing the rest of the weekend. It was so special, right? It was free. We walked in. It was really magical. That's what this type of thing can do, right? Let alone watching the youth performing. And so I think being explicit about whatever in that industry standard is for what gifts it gives back to the community make me excited about us looking up and having kind of some bigger strategy here.
And the key to doing those things, kind of like McCormick, you have to do the big tournaments that are on TV, that are like the nationally televised events. in order to fund these smaller things and keep them cheaper for the public.
So Chris, this is not really, this is sort of more or less like a merger and not really a
Don't
takeover.
use that word.
Yeah, so not a merger. Merger was used at times.
I'm just trying to figure out, you know,
Well,
because I think it's sounding like it's a takeover, but it's not a takeover.
We're not
No.
using that word either, so.
Yeah.
like, can I-
Not a
I'm gonna-
takeover,
can I
not a
say a
major
couple
for the record,
things?
merger for the record.
So I'm the sports commission liaison. I
But could
gotta,
it- But could,
yeah,
Chris, please
I'm
sort
gonna
of give
speak
us
to
the
that.
idea of what that relationship looks like then?
I'll speak
if
to
it's
it
not-
too, yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to say a couple things in appreciation, because I'm just really thankful for this council right now and for our staff for picking this up so quickly. This came at us very quickly. We've now come to understand a lot of the potential impacts to our residents, to our regional, county regional residents, not sure what I'm trying to say there. But I also think that I'm really appreciating the founding board and the sports commission board right now for taking a step back, because I think, you know, much like what we do up here all the time, all of these little organizations don't always do, but we've opened it up to a greater discussion, and we're hearing new ideas and new concerns come to the table that we can address through MOUs. And to your point, this isn't a merger because nonprofits can't merge that way, and it's not a takeover because that's just, I don't even like that term, but it just feels a little quick, right? So we're slowing it down and trying to better understand what's happening. And I agree with everyone up here. And what I hoped would come from this is that you all would help me be guided in the process of being one of these voting members. So what I'm hearing tonight is like, how do we feel about the size of a 7-person board? And how do we feel about identifying community events? And if we're gonna have a slide that says this will attract 30,000 room nights as a goal, do we have more community goals? Because the next number I see is like 100 underserved youth, but maybe that doesn't sound so good to me, right? And then as far as how it's housed, I think we're gonna have to figure out between the Sports Commission and the TDA board, and those are coming up in listening sessions. So my colleagues on the founding board, founding members have intentionally set some meetings for the 17th and 18th to hear from more folks in the community, more the Sports Commission board itself, and those that are directly employed and so on. So there's still some discovery to happen. I think the outcome here will be that likely that the Sports Commission stays as an independent nonprofit, and the TDA, and we maybe have another MOU, which is traditionally how we have done this. There's been an MOU kind of in effect, and with all the partners, this is how it's been done. So I'm thankful that it's kind of resolving to more like this, and that we might together have some input on what that would look like rather than me going off on my own, because I feel like this is a very impactful thing for the community in general. I'm very concerned.
And that's what it actually says. It says that Sports Commission will stay a nonprofit.
Well, this
So
is our
that's-
staff
that's what
presentation,
it's-
and
yeah.
it's still up in the air, right?
So
Yes.
that- it's still
That's
out
the
there.
recommendation, is
Yes.
that the
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit would still exist, but the
Yeah.
staff would no longer be nonprofit employees, they would be employees of the TDA.
Okay.
And the one thing, I wanted to make sure we point out, one of the things that was flagged in this study was our amazing ability to have volunteers. I think the consultant said he'd never seen so many, it was like 6,000 volunteers. So when you had that quick line of like, we have some concerns about volunteerism, I mean, that's a real thing. Those are our kids and our youth and our kids running across the tennis court picking up balls, right? And that's a lot of community engagement is what it is.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah.
While we're getting explicit about youth uses, which is really important for me and for many people looking for family-friendly, affordable events, I hope we can get explicit about local uses and community uses, because I think we've been missing an opportunity to address the needs of elders in our community, and I think we can all remember getting pickleball tossed in our direction. But when I have participated in their events, I see that it's multi-generational, so.
Yeah.
I also want to call out that we have a founding member of the initial Sports Commission, 2 founding members, so I see you. We're glad you're here. I think procedurally, this isn't a time we do comment, but I don't know, I just kind of felt like
I know, I wish
sometimes
we
we have to have our conversation this way because of following rules, which are set for very good reasons, but we know there's folks here interested about it, and we know that there's going to be time later to hear folks, and it also sounds like there's no decision-making, we have some more time, so even if we move on from this right now, like, there's more iterations to hear from and engage with each other.
It's true. I do hope to hear some of the public comments. I see people signed up and wearing SoCon shirts and so on. So I hope to hear from them. And we are not making any decisions or recommendations right now. But maybe we'll come back to us for more input, or maybe I'll have an update after the listening sessions. Because it's a little different, right? Like, this isn't our decision, but we have to send me forth on behalf of 25% of the vote.
And it had seemed like, I mean, just you sharing at the beginning, at the top of the conversation, that there isn't a scheduled vote gives some relief. Because
Yes.
I was feeling that pressure because
Yeah.
we
Same.
want to keep things moving. I get that. But it doesn't, like, do we have an idea for what a
Well, I
next
think
step is?
in
Should this
fairness
go
to that,
PDD?
that timeline was because it's budget season for everyone, right?
Yeah.
And so we're all coming up on this new fiscal year, and we've got to decide and know what we're doing. Because like our budgets, the TDA's budget is also a public document,
Yeah.
right? So there was a timeline there, and I think they had two scenarios, and depending on which way it went, right? So I'm really thankful to my colleagues that it's been able to slow down, because this is a bigger impact, and I think people really have an awareness of, and we could grow some great things. I'm really curious about the regionalism personally. Yeah. Master planning.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Great job
Thanks,
pulling that
Chris.
together so quickly.
Chris has been rewarded for doing such a good job by being given extra duties.
What would we do without
He
him?
is working tirelessly. Okay, we are now sort of halfway through the manager's report.
And we, again, are so sorry for the number of presentations, but this is really good information and timely in terms of when we need, is time sensitive. So we have to bring this to you. So we will have Jamie Matthews, who will open up and give, I think, the initial presentation on the TDA, along with Chris. Always gotta have Chris.
Yeah.
And then we'll have Emily Ball present on the point in time count.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Jamie Matthews, the Assistant to the City Manager, and I'm going to give you all an update on the TDA grant process. So we'll start with key takeaways. Grants from the TDA provide funds for tourism-related capital projects. The city's goal is to align our capital needs with the allowable uses from the TDA. Legislative changes last year allocated more funds for grants. We're working closely with the TDA and the county to plan and partner on projects. The TPDF Phase 1 applications are due May 17th. And the new Legacy Investment from Tourism Fund grant cycle will start in October. So changes to the occupancy tax last year will allocate less funding to the marketing and more to the grants in a 1/3, 2/3 split. The 1/3 will be split between the TPDF grants and the newly created LIF funds. And the maximum debt service period has moved from 10 years to 15 years. So staff has met with the TDA to learn more about the distinction between the two grant funds. The TPDF funds are more focused on those regional assets that directly bring tourism to Asheville. The LIF funds will include projects that help attract tourism and benefit the community. These are more those tourism adjacent projects that could possibly include infrastructure needs like the one on Cox Avenue. Also, LIFT can be used for capital maintenance, design, restoration, rehabilitation, project administration, expansion of necessary infrastructure, and enhancement of natural resources. These are all allowable uses that are new and were not given last year.
I just wanted to put an exclamation point on that. That is a new expanded flexible use of this money. It used to be, it had to be new capital. Now it can be maintenance and planning and other things like that.
That's a big change.
It is a big change.
It's a
yeah.
really big change. That's great.
So for the TPDF cycle for this year, we'll be focusing on those regional assets with applications for Harrah's and a next phase of the municipal golf course. For the LIFT process this year, which again will be in October, we'll do the Cox reapplication and McCormick as part of the major works applications. I'll note that Cox will likely not be the only LIFT application in 2023. There will be more. This is just really the one that we're fairly certain we'll do this year. So here's some of the details on the 2023 TPDF grant cycle requests. And Chris is here if y'all have any questions on those details. Looking ahead, this shows possible projects coming up through LIFT or TPDF in the upcoming years, including I-26, affordable housing, Pack Square, infrastructure improvements in downtown, like possibly parking, and ADA improvements. Also, we will have the continued focus on those regional assets, Thomas Wolfe, Harrah's Municipal Golf, and the Nature Center. Here is the timeline for the upcoming grants. Again, TPDF Phase 1 closes May 17th. They will make recommendations in October, and then the LIFT grant cycle will begin. So we'll end with the key takeaways and any questions or comments.
I guess I have one question, having attended and worked and been in the green room at the Harrah's, that what, can we make a direct connection between the events we're not able to get and these improvements, or how they'll help us maintain our current booking contracts?
Hi, Chris Corral, Director of Community. The grant request that we're asking for, there we go. So a lot of this has to do with the additional audio and lighting equipment. So concert audio and lighting is not going to specifically get us new acts, but what it does is it reduces what we're renting for shows. So we have a rig, but we need more stuff, so we rent less. The rigging enhancements and the freight elevator replacement really are like the two biggest things with this that are TDA focused. Freight elevator, for example, the first Fed Cup tennis event we had Ashley Barty, former world #1, get stuck on the elevator 15 minutes before her match, which was a really stressful 15 minutes. But we got the elevator working, got her out, and it's 52 years old, so it needs replacing. And then in rigging, I don't want to get too complicated, but we have 20-foot bays to rig the concert gear off of. And so when the point where the truss needs to hang is in the middle, you have to use Pythagorean theorem, and you get to where the motor hook is, and it's like 15 feet lower than the rigging area. And when you need to get the hook height up, because the tours are getting bigger and bigger, and we've missed out on a lot of really large events because the hook height is too low, which makes the lights and everything too close to the head of the performer. So we missed like multiple multi-night runs by really big acts that wouldn't play Asheville because we don't have enough seats, but we can do multi-night runs. And we've lost out on Cirque du Soleil, I don't even know how many times, because we can't get the rigging height up. So these are things that are like easy wins for TDA money that really make sense, that are good for locals because we bring the programming, but also bring a lot of tourists to town. Like tonight's show that unfortunately got canceled, we were at 82% out of market, so on a Tuesday night. So I mean, that's really big for downtown, right?
Alison Krauss and
Robert Plant. Sad days.
Right now. You had me at
Thanks
Cirque
for
du
that.
Soleil.
Yeah, thanks for that technical understanding.
Any other questions for this part of the presentation? Because we're about to change gears.
One in time.
Yeah, okay. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you. Emily Ball.
Good evening.
The mic, you can pull it down. Yeah, there you go.
Good evening. Emily Ball and Chris Corral, maybe, here to talk to you with a couple updates from the Homeless Strategy Division here at the city. Two main things I want to share with you. One is some updates on the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee, HIAC, and their implementation of recommendations from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. You know, we received those recommendations as a community at the end of January, and HIAC has begun their work in implementing those. They're actively transitioning to a new way. We collectively are actively transitioning to a new way of working together as a community, and that work, I think, is led by HIAC. And one thing they have done is establish work groups, I'll talk more about that in a minute, that are starting to take action on those recommendations. The other thing I want to share with you is our 2023 point-in-time count. The results of that count have been submitted to the federal government. Overall, the count is more in line with the historic population size that we've seen in our community. Shelter beds are coming back online as pandemic recovery continues. So a lot of our shelters had decreased their capacity during the pandemic. Some of those beds are coming back. Unsheltered homelessness certainly continues to be higher than prior to the pandemic. And also, as utilization of our homeless management information system continues to improve, then we expect our data will continue to improve. So first, again, as you all know, a primary recommendation from the National Alliance to End Homelessness on how we can decrease unsheltered homelessness specifically in our community is really to reorient our continuum of care, which is a federal framework for how local communities can collaborate to decrease homelessness. The continuum of care really maps out seats at the table, so really identifies who is in which seat with what decision-making ability and how are those seats coordinated with each other, and creates a way for stakeholders to work together effectively across the community. We know that there is no single entity that controls every element that connects with the issue of homelessness, and so the continuum of care is intended to provide a platform for stakeholders across all of those elements to come together and collaborate. The continuum of care is governed by a governance board, and that is currently the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee. And so they have begun implementation of the Alliance recommendations with 4 high priority recommendations through a series of work groups that they've established. The first is shelter, looking at expanding our emergency shelter capacity in the community. Second is outreach and encampment response to deepen our capacity and improve our overall response. Third is coordinated entry, which has to do with matching people with the right housing resource that will end their episode of homelessness. And then the fourth is governance, which will really retool the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee, move that function out from the city and county as recommended by the Alliance, and again, create really clear seats at the table for community participation. All of those work groups are meeting very actively and will propose policies and plans to HIAC for their approval to the full board. And then that board will advance any relevant requests to the city or the county or other key partners. And the goal through this restructure is really for the Continuum of Care Board to hold issue ownership and to be in the driver's seat on our community's homeless strategy. Secondly, I want to share with you the results of the 2023 point-in-time count. Some background, the point-in-time count is a federal requirement. It is required that that count occur during the last 10 days in January for every continuum of care, and that it provide a census of people who meet the federal definition of literal homelessness. I know that you all have mentioned in the past some interest in additional counts, recognizing that it seems that we have some population shifts through the course of the year, so that's something that HIAC may consider. Point-in-time counts cover the full continuum of care, so for us that's all of Buncombe County geography. And our team here at the City and the Homeless Strategy Division works with service providers and with volunteers to collect all of that data, aggregate those results and deduplicate, and then submit those to the federal government. That was done April 28th, and that submission informs federal resources and strategy, and that's partly directly to our community and partly aggregated with other COCs across the country for an annual report to Congress on progress and for a resource request. So again, our count was conducted on January 31st. Shelters and transitional housing programs provide data on folks who are staying with them on that night. So we know that that count should be very accurate. We have a really clear picture of who those folks are in emergency shelter and transitional housing. And then we had 75 volunteers who participated in a street count to identify and survey folks who were unsheltered. I know that several of you participated in that count, and that is the largest volunteer effort that our COC has had. So really tremendous participation from our community in that effort. We also had A-Hope and Haywood Street surveying folks who are unsheltered on the following day. A lot of unsheltered folks participate in services at both of those locations. Point-in-time count, for me, is our most comprehensive data set in the community because it covers our full COC geography. And also certainly has limitations, and those are important to acknowledge. One of those is that participation is voluntary, of course. We definitely had volunteers on the street count teams who reported that people declined to participate in an interview. And staff discarded 16 surveys of folks who are unsheltered because they just didn't have sufficient data. The overview for this year's point in time count, I've included our point in time data for the last several years because the pandemic has had such a significant impact. But our total count in 2023 was 573 people identified. Most of those folks were in emergency shelter or transitional housing. That was 402 people. And then 171 people were counted as unsheltered on that night. Again, included data from prior to the pandemic and then throughout the pandemic. If you look at our 2020 data, our total population is not significantly different based on this year's count and the 2020 count, but where folks are located is a key change that's occurred during the pandemic. Overall, the majority of people identified in the count are single adults, about 88%. We have a relatively small number of homeless families. That was about 12% of the count. And 21% of people identified were chronically homeless, which means they've been homeless at least 12 months and they have a disability. And then 34% of people identified were veterans. That's really high. Nationally, veterans are about 7% of the homeless population. So we have a disproportionately high veteran subpopulation. That's primarily related to our VA Medical Center, of course, as a regional VA, and then also ABCCM's Veterans Restoration Quarters is a federally funded program that serves veterans from across the country.
Emily, before you advance, these numbers, the 88 and the 12%, are these also pretty consistent with our history?
Yes.
Okay.
So just to highlight the point about the disproportionately high number of veterans in the point in time count, one thing that we don't see on this chart is the breakdown of unsheltered versus sheltered. And as I recall, though, our unsheltered homeless veterans was very low. Because they are participating through the VA's programs. So we have an interesting situation in Asheville where some folks who are veterans travel to Asheville for services because the services are here through our VA and ABCCM. So just to highlight that kind of unique aspect of our community.
That's exactly right. I do have that data in front of me, but it would take me a minute to find. But I believe that we had something like 11 or 12 unsheltered veterans. Vast majority of veterans are in transitional housing primarily. And I'll also say that because we have such a large veteran subpopulation, we are also eligible as a continuum of care for federal housing resources for veterans. So we have a wealth of HUD-VASH and supportive services for veteran families. So really a high-functioning system for responding to the needs of homeless veterans.
Since we're looking at this slide, I just feel like everyone needs to get their calculator out and realize that going from 232 folks on the streets unsheltered to 171 is a 26% drop. I find that really hopeful. I don't think we're done any of the hard work, but I feel like we're moving in a direction that we're trying to, and we're rowing in the same direction. And I feel hopeful. I feel like we might look back at 2023 and go, all right, that's when things turned around.
And I'm very hopeful about the number. I think why it still seems to people when you're driving around, when you're looking around our community, it doesn't feel like it's dropped, and that is because of that unsheltered number. In 2020, unsheltered, the number was only 65, and so we're still, almost 3 times that number. So visually, if you're out in the community, it doesn't feel like, oh, we're only,
We're moving in the right direction.
But I think another important point that Emily made is that one of the big things we saw drop during the pandemic was shelters providing bed spaces. We saw a reduction in the number of bed spaces, and so now those are coming back online, and there are more opportunities for folks to have shelter. And we've seen it. I mean, I'm on the HIAC subcommittee for shelter exploration and toured almost every shelter in Buncombe County. And I mean, for example, the Salvation Army has rooms of made-up beds that are empty because they don't have the staffing, they don't have the funding to be able to staff those rooms and provide shelter space. So still an ongoing challenge.
And so that answers my question, because I was wondering about the sheltered of 482 in 2020. And now it's down to,
Right.
and I'm just wondering, so that's what it is, that the beds and.
the
A
last
little
one.
bit, yeah,
Having staff to.
Yeah.
and not
Okay,
any
got it.
new shelters, yeah.
Well, I have two questions. I'm really glad to serve with y'all because y'all are sparking a lot of ideas, but does the 482 include some numbers that we had as temporary rooms? Like the Ramada?
The 482 was prior to the pandemic, when we didn't have any non-congregate shelter operational, but I was gonna mention to your point that the 402 in this year's count for folks in shelter and transitional housing, it's relatively similar, almost identical to the number of shelter beds that we had in the 2022 count, but the nature of those beds is very different because in 2022 we still had significant non-congregate shelter operating, and so what we've seen since then is that kind of our traditional shelter beds are coming back online.
I was
So-
kind of, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was kind of wondering if the 232 to the 171 was based on the successes of the Ramada, because we had folks there getting people IDs, getting people into programs and so on, and maybe that's influenced this.
Folks at the Ramada would have been included in that 405 last year, because that was a non-congregate shelter, so was included in that shelter count. But I will say, Charles on my team, who did a yeoman's job in pulling this data together, did cross-reference the folks who were at the Ramada with the unsheltered count this year. We only had 2 people who were identified in that unsheltered count for 2023. So
Wow.
great
Wow.
to
Wow.
see.
Wow,
Great to see
that's
that.
really good news.
Mhm.
I'm so happy for them.
Can you help me understand what the decrease in our PIT count might mean for our funding stream, if at all? I know what we were told to tell people is that this count helps us to access funding to address homelessness
Yes.
or housing insecurity.
I'll give you 2 examples. So this, the point-in-time data set is used frequently by the federal government in formulas when new resources are being allocated to communities, and that's a bit of a simplified version. But for example, during the pandemic, we received 47 new emergency housing vouchers as part of the CARES Act. As part of ARPA. In the formula to determine how many vouchers every continuum of care received included data like the point-in-time data. So it's a data point that's frequently used by the federal government. More specifically, in our annual continuum of care funding, which is the largest federal program for homeless funding, in our community, that's about $2 million a year, and it's a competitive program. We compete with other COCs across the country. We submit an enormous amount of information that is scored, and the higher our score is, the more resources we're eligible to receive. A significant portion of that scoring matrix is based on your continuum of care's performance, and one of those performance indicators is a decrease in the overall number of people identified as homeless in your point-in-time count, and specifically related to unsheltered homelessness.
Okay.
So it's not exactly. Deborah's got it.
Okay, well, because I think some of the things that were sparked in my mind by our conversation on the dais, but also what you presented, and I want to hold on to hope. But I think about the visual, and what I hear is the actual burden of people experiencing the outcomes of lack of access to housing and healthcare. And specifically, I noticed since 2020 and now the difference in the resources that one could glean. For example, I don't carry cash like I did maybe have a couple dollars in 2020. So when my neighbors experiencing deep need are asking for the spare change, that gleaning isn't happening because people aren't carrying extra resources. Or the neighbors who used to go through the recycle bins in my neighborhood are finding less resources to turn in for a trade. So I am concerned about some of that impact. The need seems maybe smaller on this chart, but a deeper need and a more intense need. I also will acknowledge that you named the limit of this tool. While it is an important tool, having experienced the point-in-time count as a volunteer, there were a lot of people that didn't want to be counted. And there are a lot of people that weren't counted because they weren't close to resources, because we pushed people to the outskirts and to the neighborhoods. So we didn't count the people in my neighborhood. And I just wanted to maybe acknowledge that while this is like, we've addressed the issue with more resources and more people and more coordination and more ways of possibility in saying yes, but we have a long way to go. And I just can't help but remind myself that that number is not the whole number.
Yeah, I'll say to that this is quantitative data only, and it does not, as you say, doesn't really convey the depth of suffering of people, particularly people who are unsheltered. And also that 171, as the mayor mentioned, is almost triple our pre-pandemic numbers, so still a significant need. Demographic characteristics of the 573 people who were counted, I won't talk through all of these, you can see these here, but these are relatively in line with the demographic characteristics from last year's count. You can see that the majority of folks identified as white, and also that we have a disproportionately high number of people who identified as Black, African American, or African compared to the general population. Majority of people identified as male and also as non-Hispanic.
Emily, do you think in the future we could get comparative year-over-year data for some of those? I just
Absolutely.
couldn't remember if 19.7 is an improvement or not.
I believe 19.5 was
Okay.
last year's count.
So 0.2 tenths of a person.
We also, you may remember that, so the data that I've just been through are the data points that we collect are prescriptive. HUD has a lot of requirements around that. And then last year in our community, for the first time, we added some supplemental questions specifically for people who were unsheltered. So we hadn't really had that baseline data prior to last year, but then we again asked those same questions this year. The first was, when you last had housing, where was it? So what we're getting at here is, did you, where were you living when you became homeless in this episode of homelessness? You can see the 2023 data is in that darker color, and the top bar of each of these, 2022 right below it. Not a, in some ways, not a significant change. But about 70% of folks were either in Asheville or Western North Carolina when they lost that housing. 7.6% of people were elsewhere in North Carolina, and then about 21% of people were in another state. And you can see at the bottom here that we had 131 responses to this question, and that's out of the 171 people who were unsheltered. We also asked, what's the main reason you aren't staying at a shelter right now? We had 109 responses here. And you can see the answers there. This is, again, fairly similar to last year, and this is great data for that shelter work group of HIAC in particular, as they're looking to implement the Alliance recommendations. The Alliance recommended a specific number of beds that our community should look at adding, and also had some recommendations around the nature of those beds and the program design. So this is good information for that work group. Next steps, HIAC will review these results in detail and really unpack those at their meeting this week. That's on May 11th. And overall, as we have talked about, the point in time certainly does have limitations, and we want to continue to increase utilization of HMIS in our communities so that we have better real-time data and can really increasingly inform strategies in a higher impact way. I anticipate that the new continuum of care governance structure, again, HIAC has that work group that is developing that. I anticipate that structure will reflect a real focus on performance and data. It's directly related to our funding, but more importantly, it's directly related to whether or not we're ending homelessness in our community, and that is the job of the continuum of care. We will have this full data set posted on the data page of our Homeless Strategy Division website here at the city. And I will also say that I expect that we have 198 units of permanent supportive housing coming online within the year. We don't have an exact timeline for either of those. Homeward Bound's project has 85 units and certainly should have occupancy in advance of the 2024 count. Shangri-La's project has 113 units and may have occupancy right around the point in time count. We'll see how close they're able to get to that, but I think those should have a really significant impact on our 2024 count, particularly on the unsheltered count. Folks who are unsheltered are the highest needs people in our community typically, and we want to be sure that they are first in line for housing resources. And then lastly, we will continue to provide regular updates to you all through HCD about HIAC's progress as they continue to implement those recommendations.
Thank you, Emily. Is there any follow-up on doing additional point-in-time counts? We had talked about doing them more often.
She's,
Did I just miss it? Okay.
I think HIAC will look at that. We'll be talking about
HIAC's
that on
gonna look at that.
Thursday when.
But
we
between now
dive into
and
that.
next year, we're not scheduling any, or they might?
Well, she's.
They might.
Okay.
They might make that, they're looking at making recommendations to us about that.
Okay.
I think Emily's personally hopeful that we will do this more often.
Yeah, we discussed asking more questions and doing it more often, and I just want to echo support for that, because we will learn so much more than this one little week in January, right? Because I think it changes throughout the year as the weather changes.
Yeah, and again, I think we want, and I can't project a timeline on this, but staff are working very hard. Charles on our team is working very hard with service providers to really increase their capacity around HMIS, because ideally, HMIS captures a wealth of information when it's used well, and we have a lot of opportunity to really better understand the needs of folks in our community throughout the year, not only on this single
And we
night.
still have some community partners that aren't using it. Are we considering making that a requirement of any funding, or?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It
Which
is
is why they won't take our funding,
generally already a requirement. It is a
It is
requirement
already
of
a
HUD funding.
requirement,
just the one.
But
Is there
yes, I
something
think
that
we have
they-
some
do they
community
need, like-
opportunity around that.
Do they need support because they can't do the technology
The only
piece?
one who's not participating has to be paid.
Has to be paid to do that? Well, that's what I mean, is there some support that they need to do it? Okay. So it's not, okay.
I just want to thank you, Emily, and your growing team for the work you're doing on this. This is great. Some of us did get to participate in the point in time count. It's really interesting to have conversations with folks and hear the complex stories, and I got to say, it's really hard to put it on the form, that you got to fill out. The form doesn't always work with the story, so I know that information is really hard to pull out, and really interesting data around where folks are first experiencing homelessness, whether in Asheville or somewhere else, and they traveled to Asheville. I think we're doing our best to try to get a picture of something that's, got a lot of layers and pretty complicated.
I want to also say thank you to you all for supporting that growing capacity on my team. It has made a huge difference, and I think we have a lot of work to do in our community, and the job of our team is to support that happening with service providers, be a convener and provide some technical assistance and be kind of that behind the scenes infrastructure. And I think with the capacity that we now have in the current budget year, which is new for us, it's really given us the ability to take some big steps forward, and I think we'll continue to do that, and I'm grateful for it.
I have one last question. So can you go back a few slides to when you last had housing, where was it? Is HIAC weighing in, or do you have any input on this other state number jumping 9%? Is there any discussion around that? I'm just curious.
Well, they're gonna unpack tomorrow.
You're
so
unpacking,
maybe you'll-
and then I guess what I'll do is send some questions forth then. Is there, what is our process when we find that someone's last place was housing in another state? Do we try and get them back to their last known housing, or do we just accept that data and move on?
But this is also where we need a deeper dive, because
Yeah.
remember our veteran number.
Yeah.
So if veterans are traveling to the VA from another state
Right.
to tap into services and get sheltered, and very few are unsheltered, maybe that's responsible for that number. We don't, that's where we need that layered information to be able to understand
And
that.
the multiple counts, right? Yeah.
And also I'll also plug HMIS again for this, because I think to your question about, are we just saying like, thanks for your information, see you later? That is the nature of the point in time count. That's not the nature of service providers' work with people when they're showing up for those programs. So there is opportunity to really dig in with people about what's going on and what needs and opportunities are. Can we help them reconnect with friends or family who might be in the state they came from? Yeah.
And
How do we
also,
resolve that?
anecdotally, I know several of us were at the point in time count, and several people I talked to were from rural southern Appalachia. And so we look at it as another state, and for some reason, the picture in my head is that they're like hopping trains across the country to come to Asheville to be unhoused. And the reality is they're like from East Tennessee, and the bus was quicker to get here than Knoxville, or they're from North Georgia. And so I think as we get more granular, that'll be interesting. That doesn't change that they're out of state, but the context matters to me somehow, that we're the biggest resource, the biggest city in several states driving distance. So it's more about like the meta region than a state boundary.
I also wanted to highlight something we've gone back and forth about and talked about on the next slide with what's the main reason you're not staying in a shelter right now. And I'm glad to see, while it's still troubling that there's 5 or 6 responses, I'm glad to see their full option is not at the top.
Yeah, it looks like about 6 people said
Yeah.
that was the reason.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, it's 109 responses, so it's not everyone, but I'm glad that proportionally that's a small response.
And understand more what restrictive rules means.
We've learned a lot about that recently, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Finally crossed the
Does
finish
this
line.
conclude the manager's report?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, right, everybody. Okay, we're gonna shift gears to the public hearings agenda. We have 2 items. First is a public hearing to consider a resolution authorizing the submission of the 2023-2024 annual action plan. And Nikki Reed is going to speak to us about that.
Mayor, well, there was one more slide on Cox Avenue.
I know, that was
a
just
mistake.
a mistake. I think
Okay.
it was supposed to be
I wasn't
under the TPDF stuff, and
Thanks.
yeah. I saw that too.
I was not sure. if we
Emily
missed something.
carefully avoided it.
So good evening, Nikki Reed. I'm the Director of the Community Economic Development Department. I'm here tonight to share some slides regarding the public hearing for the 2023-24 Annual Action Plan. So just some key takeaways here. So really each year, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development provides the city with CDBG and home funds to support a variety of uses: affordable housing, public services, economic development, community improvements. And then here too tonight, we're bringing forward some funding that is related to the CDBG CV fund. So that was in 2020 an allocation in response to coronavirus. We have here, takes a lot of work through our Housing and Community Development Committee, who reviews the CDBG and the CV allocation. And so looking at that, of almost 1.1 million was decided through HCD for a total of 12 grants. That also includes staff administration. And then there's the CDBG CV funding and the remaining amount of 193,000 and some change, looking at 2 grants there. And then also for the home funding, this is really siphoned through the the Asheville Regional Housing Consortium. So that is a 4-county consortium that really comes together as a collaboration to get this affordable housing allocation from HUD. So we looked at a total of 9 grants that came out of ARHC for almost $2.7 million in funding. That also includes staff administration. So tonight, this really represents the final step. So the public hearing is really the final step in submitting this action plan to HUD to really define these community investments of the federal funding resources. And so here I just wanted to walk through the process. So in December is when the applications for CDBG and home opened. Those applications were due in February, and then March is really when staff reviews the applications. And then March is when we work with committees, both HCD and ARHC, to really dive deep on those presentations. We hear from the applicants in this process, and then the funding recommendations are really worked through those committees. At that point, when those recommendations are completed, then we publish those for a public comment period. And so to date, we haven't received any written public comments, but we will round out tonight by hearing comments here in person at the public hearing. And so I wanted to share that the consolidated plan is really our 5-year plan that we published to HUD that talks about the different priorities for our community. And then our annual action plan really speaks to those overall plan priorities. And so this is from 2020 to 2024. So this will be updated in a relative short time frame. But you can see here that really a high priority for our community, of course,
is rental housing for households at 60% AMI and below, special needs housing, jobs for low-income persons, and you'll see other priorities here that are ultimately reflected in the applications that we fund. Okay, and then really just to highlight the awards that are proposed. So you can see here we have the agencies listed as well as their project program and their recommended awards. So you're seeing some domestic violence funding for Helpmate Spark Foundation. With homelessness response, we're seeing Haywood Congregation, Fiscal Legal, Homeward Bound, as well as even On Track Financial with credit counseling, housing and financial support. So really seeing a lot of representation there from our public services. And then the next slide, we're also seeing other awards through our CDBG program, Mountain BizWorks through Economic Development, Helpmate, Carolina Small Business Development Fund, again with Homeward Bound. Here we're also seeing Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity looking at affordable housing repairs. We also have a set aside here for the community centers. So this is City of Asheville community centers that are located in our low to moderate income census tracts. Last year we funded some improvements at Stevens-Lee, so here we are setting aside for funding for community centers as well as the admin staff line there. I did want to point to our CDBG CV. So really the initial funding for this CV program was almost 1.5. We spent a lot of that funding on rental assistance. So this is really some of the last remaining unallocated funding. And you're seeing Helpmate there with COVID court advocacy. Their emergency shelter costs we learned were eligible for this funding. And so you're seeing that on the slide, as well as Fiscal Legal. And then lastly, this was the recommendations that came through ARHC, the consortium. And so again, with a 4-county footprint, what you're seeing on the slide here is that we've looked at really dispersing these funds through a variety of housing types as well as locations. So you're seeing that rental construction funded in Transylvania County, as well as some homeownership investments in Madison with a community housing coalition there, some tenant-based rental assistance, as well as Henderson County really showing up with down payment assistance for their Habitat for Humanity branch, as well as some of Bunkum's investments here in Mountain Housing, villas at Haywood, so other significant investments to really help advance affordable housing in our county and in our region. Okay, so again, at key takeaways, this is really just rounding out our process here tonight. And with that, I will say that after the public hearing, we are looking for council to take action so that we can submit this to HUD. I'm here to answer any questions, but otherwise I will turn it over to the mayor to host the public hearing. Thank you.
My turn. Let me check our. Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing and I'm going to close the public hearing because no one has signed up to speak under this item. Do I have a motion?
Oh,
Under CDBG? So I have a lot of people signed up for general public comment at the end of the meeting, but not under this particular item. Okay. Do I have a motion?
I move to adopt a resolution authorizing the submission of the city's fiscal year 2023-2024 annual action plan to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, along with the annual action plan amendments for years 2019 through 2020 and 2022 through 2023 that include prior year resources to be rolled forward into the 2023-2024 CDBG and home projects, and authorizing the city manager to sign all necessary documents to this effect.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I want to make one comment though, as the Home Consortium Chair. So we have, this was just one-time money because it was related to COVID. Yep. But in a previous conversation, we were just talking about the possibility of things like the growing uses of tourism lodging tax dollars. And these are great projects on this slide. I know the slide's gone, but there are a lot of things moving forward that are critical, like homeowner rehab and homeowner replacement that we don't often see get a lot of funding. And I sure would love to have a couple $1 million a year in housing coming from that, just to even focus on this. Like, if we could crank this much out every year, we would really make a bigger dent in our housing needs.
From what source?
Well, I'm just saying, last conversation, we talked about the expanding uses of some of the TPDF and some of the monies, but
So,
lodging
yeah,
tax, yeah.
another legislative change, which,
I'm just not saying it's doable now, but it's been talked about, right? The county has recommended it, the county has sought legal advice on whether or not they can
yeah,
have
we
it.
did have so what Councilwoman Turner's talking about is the use of the room tax in a more flexible way to include affordable housing. Now, I think, it still have to be capital construction, so the jury's still out about that, but we did have a conversation just
Yeah,
last week, I believe, it was last week, about that issue.
yeah, let's keep it alive, keep talking about it. Thank you.
Okay, so, thank you. The next item on our public hearing agenda is a public hearing to amend the UDO regarding open space standards, and Will Palmquist has been sitting through this whole meeting, so he won't get stuck in the stairwell.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Will Palmquist with Planning and Urban Design, and I'll be presenting this request to amend the Unified Development Ordinance, specifically regarding open space requirements. So just a little bit of background, and just to start off, that as you all know, open space just pertains to area that's required by the zoning to be set aside for recreation or relief, and just kind of making sure that buildings do not occupy every square inch of a property. So essentially, back in July of 2022, the UDO was amended pretty significantly to change the open space requirements. It reduced the required open space for project sites that are less than an acre in size, as well as incentivizing higher quality open space overall. And it also incentivized projects that were on a site of 1 acre or more to either provide a minimum amount of affordable housing or to upgrade the site to meet current stormwater standards, essentially saying that if you don't do those things, you have to provide an open space requirement of 50%. But if you do provide one of those two things, you can reduce that to anywhere between 10 and 20%, depending on the type of project. And there are some exemptions in the code where open space would not be required, one of which is if you have a existing site in a building and you're expanding it by less than 1,500 square feet. What we found since the adoption of that code and some project reviews that have been reaching out to staff is that this has become pretty restrictive overall, having that limit, that maximum allowance of 1,500 square feet of building size for an expansion. Essentially what projects and existing buildings are running into is that because they can't meet the incentives, either provide affordable housing because, let's say, they're a commercial site, or because it's an existing site and they'd have to tear up their entire property to install stormwater mitigation infrastructure, and they can't reasonably do 50% open space. They're kind of stuck with a very limited expansion size. So what this proposed amendment would do essentially is would raise that threshold for expansions or additions of existing buildings. Instead of being 1,500 square feet, it would be 50% of the building's pre-expansion gross floor area. And that aligns really nicely with the provisions for when a site needs to come into full compliance, providing things like the latest and greatest landscaping and parking, all that kind of requirements. So that's a good alignment with existing code already in section 711.1. And there's also a couple of minor cleanups that this would be doing as well, such as clarifying the intent of how much natural open space can be used to meet the overall requirement, and also to remove historic resources from the open space typology list, since properties with historic landmark designations are already exempted from open space requirements. So the pros and cons identified by staff include that buildings would now be allowed to expand up to 50% of the gross pre-expansion gross floor area, which matches the threshold for full site compliance, and would also clarify natural open space allocation and remove duplicative code about historic resources. The only con that, staff identified is that there would be a number of sites that would be exempted from either meeting that really high 50% open space or redeveloping their site into affordable housing or stormwater standards. So there would be some sites purposefully that we that would not have to meet those new requirements, but would be able to still expand their existing building. This proposal meets a few of the goals in Living Asheville's comprehensive plan, including to increase and diversify the housing supply, to celebrate the unique identity of neighborhoods through creative placemaking, and to promote great architecture and urban design to enhance placemaking. It should be noted that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval of this text amendment at their April 5th meeting with a 5-0 vote. Staff concurs with the Planning and Zoning Commission and recommends approval of the proposed text amendment, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Just one comment, Will. I remember from when we went through the open space amendments, there was some confusion. People think of like grass, but open space can also mean trees, right?
Yeah, it's a number of different things, and you get more credit for having higher quality of open space, and you can reduce your requirement even more if you have a certain like size or shape or flat area of open space as well. So yeah, it can be a lot of different things that counts to that requirement.
Thank you.
We talked about this on Thursday at the budget brief, or the agenda briefing, but can you confirm that there are other parts of 7-Eleven that have been recommended by the Urban Forestry Commission for over a year that we might consider at a future date?
Yeah, so there are ongoing efforts to amend sections of the UDO, such as, I think this is open space is 7-Eleven-4, so I think 7-Eleven-3 is the general landscaping section, and that's being looked into as far as amendments that would perhaps increase the minimum soil volume for trees so that they are healthier. So maybe focusing more on quality of trees for landscaping standards instead of just the quantity, requiring third-party inspections of those plantings. As well as the tree canopy preservation ordinance, which there are some proposals being pursued. So those efforts are being led by other staff in our department and development services. So they're not unrelated to this, but they are separate initiatives that are being worked on.
And I did hear our new urban forester talking about that, our last Urban Forestry Commission meeting. I hope to see that soon and to be able to support it. For consistency, I didn't support the last iteration of this, and I won't be supporting this one tonight. But I still have the same questions around impact on our tree canopy, which is our living above ground stormwater mitigation infrastructure, and the level of affordability of housing that this is meant to incentivize, which seems to be loosened. So I unfortunately won't be supporting this tonight, but thank you for helping add to my understanding.
We did do some of that though, right? We grew the basin size, the depth size, the circumference of the tree.
I believe so.
So this is on top of some of those previous, okay. I'll look into it.
Well, the other parts of 7-Eleven are coming later.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm happy to make a motion.
Please do.
Okay. I move to approve the proposed wording amendments to Chapter 7 of the Asheville Code of Ordinances and find that the proposed amendments are reasonable, are in the public interest, are consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and meet the development needs of the community, and that the amendments will, 1, reduce administrative barriers to housing, development, and diversification, 2, support contextually appropriate infill development in a variety of housing types, and 3, promote adaptive reuse as a means of conserving materials, history, and embodied energy in buildings.
Sandra, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and I'll open the public hearing and close the public hearing. We do not have anyone signed up to speak under this item. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, that concludes our printed agenda. We, thank you, Will. We have a lot of people signed up to speak under public comment. Folks, you will have 3 minutes to speak. And please watch the lights on the lectern. I think I've seen some people exit who signed up to speak, so we'll just try to do our best here The lights on the lectern will indicate green means go, orange means almost ready to stop, red means stop. Please direct your comments to council, and also, we, just as a reminder, we don't get an opportunity to engage in a back and forth. This is just our opportunity to hear from you. So the first person signed up to speak, and I've got to toggle back and forth here, is Stephanie Phillip.
Good evening. Where did you say the light was?
It's right there.
Okay. Good evening. I am Stephanie Phillips. I've been told my ancestry goes back 4 generations in Western Carolina. I am from royal descendants who began Phillips 66 Corporation, who hold extensive property and business interests in this region. I have been petitioning the federal government and politicians to declassify my family's ancestry since 2005. I am requesting a shared seat and vote at the board table of Phillips 66 with my daughter. I am still married. I am proposing a peace treaty signed with 2-territory solution at the northern border of Pennsylvania to begin with. We do not concede any oil or natural gas rights north of that. Priority 1, equal representation of both territories, securing all dams, the electrical grid, communications, and food supply, and helping people out of potential floodplains. Many people are working on this. International World Peace festivities can begin weekend before the day, September 21st, and continuing through the following weekend. All are invited. Please have a Citizens Emergency Preparedness Day on or around the second weekend of September. References are available. Quality of life should be defined as purpose, community, choices, opportunity, quality lifelong education, entertainment, early childhood physical education and recreation, and proper care of seniors for optimum health. A sense of peace and security that endures the entire lifespan, mutually secured by all civilians, civil servants, beginning at the neighborhood level. Peace be with you, and thank you for your service and consideration.
Thank you. The next person signed up to speak is Rusty Olson.
Hi. My name is Rusty Olson. First, let me thank you for affording this time. I'm here submitting 30 petitions signed by small business owners like our family who operate businesses along Merriman Avenue, as well as over 2,000 petitions signed by local residents, each in opposition to the Merriman Avenue traffic reconfiguration. There was no district survey to see if these neighborhoods would vote for this project, and the businesses were never surveyed. We're not here to say biking infrastructure isn't a good investment in many of the areas of the city. It's just not a sound investment on US Highway 25. The Merriman project in its current configuration looks like the proverbial bridge to nowhere. We're concerned about the safety and economic impacts of the Merriman Avenue road diet. Being a once heavily traveled major commercial corridor, it's now suffering from unpredictable and sometimes unbearable congestion. The results have been slowed and less traffic as our customers are now avoiding Merriman. Yes, Merriman may be safer for pedestrians, but there are other methods to slow traffic without sacrificing 2 full lanes on a US highway. While this may seem great for the very few numbers of cyclists using this corridor, it has come at a cost, including loss of revenue to those of us doing business on the corridor. It's imperative that the interest of the business owners be given equal consideration to the cyclist complete street advocates in the planning for this US highway. In order to assess and evaluate the impact of the traffic lane reductions and the addition of bike lanes, we want to know how you will measure the results and when you can get back to us. We request the city obtain and publish data on 1, traffic counts on Merriman pre and post reconfiguration, 2, traffic counts on major intersecting arteries such as Graceland, Edgewater, and Beaver Dam, 3, vehicle accident counts, types, and severity relative to the number of vehicles as a percentage, 4, cyclist and pedestrian accident counts, types, and severity, 5, vehicle speeds traveled pre and post reconfiguration, and 6, most importantly, first responder times pre and post reconfiguration. We remind you that the public and businesses were guaranteed a return to 4 lanes if the road diet was determined to be unsuccessful. Those critical success factors have never been identified. When will we get answers on the real outcomes of this project? It is not very acceptable to hear nothing back from council. We believe that a basic working infrastructure is a very reasonable expectation for businesses, and we're upset that we've been left to deal with this poorly planned and executed project. Please pay attention to all of your constituents as we've weathered pandemics and inflationary impacts on our businesses. It's an attempt to secure measurable determinants and a timeline for that decision. Hopefully you'll provide this. We sincerely ask that this be given a priority to return Merriman to its original configuration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you email those measurement requests or submit that maybe?
Maggie has them.
Great, thank you.
Sandy Aldridge.
Good evening again. The last time I spoke about this subject, it was 10 o'clock and we were all about to go to sleep and yawning and I was looking up at the ceiling. But to repeat what I had said then, I've done some research for city buses in Asheville. So the Federal Transportation Administration offered a $4.4 million grant for 6 buses and 3 batteries. On behalf of a lot of drivers, a lot of the riders of the buses, we would like clarity on what's really going on with this. Or is anybody looked at the grant, taken the grant? What's the deal with it? And I know everybody would appreciate that because we are determined to get more buses. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Tim Sadler.
Hey guys, Tim Sadler. Here to just mention that there's a coalition that's formed to address this LIFT fund. And, you know, I just got back to town about 2 months ago. I was gone for some time, and I'm just wondering, you know, where the community engagement is, like where the energy is in the community, and, you know, going around talking to folks, there really is quite a bit of interest, excitement, potential excitement. People are excited at the potential that we have here with this moment, and it's a big moment for this council. I would say maybe the biggest that I've personally witnessed, you know, is what are we gonna do with this new opportunity to specifically address service workers and housing those service workers in our community. I'm going into restaurants and, you know, service places a lot these days. I've been lucky to have the time to do it and talking to folks. And I mean, yes, we're doing great. Our budget is up to over $200 million. You know, I think when I first got here in 2010, it was $90 million. So we're gaining, you know, but at the same time, our service workers are never more pinched than they are today. And I just call on this council, specifically those that are going to be involved with that committee and picking the people that are going to be on that committee. All eyes are on this council. Please do not let us down. And secondly, I also wanted to mention, or I asked the question, I should say, why the South Slope was prioritized for infrastructure over Eagle Market Street. I've talked to folks over there, and they are absolutely miffed that the sidewalks there are still not addressed, and the streetlights there are still not addressed. Why do they not have a seat at the table on the TDA? Why is one seat not designated for Eagle Market Street, Black Asheville? I'd love to see that become a real thing where we ask for that. So lastly, if I have a little bit here, I had this idea about the monument as well, and really kind of testament to Mayor Manheimer, your leadership in preserving the water system here. I think that was one of the best things that I've seen in, you know, public service. We're so unique to have our water system. There are so few municipalities that have it, and just an idea.
Thank you. Rusty Sampson. Sounds like they're having a party out there in the hall. I think it's Cora the dog.
Good evening. I'm Rusty Sampson. I'm a volunteer with the Sports Commission. I've volunteered over the last couple of years with 2 SoCons, 2 Grapples, 2 Asheville Opens, and the Billie Jean King Cup. During that time, I've been very impressed with the leadership and the organization of the Sports Commission and how they functioned as an autonomous organization. The Sports Commission has always worked well in the past with Explore Asheville, but then within the last year, Explore Asheville both temporarily withheld funding for a period of time from the Sports Commission. They also asked the Sports Commission to move out of their office space, which had been provided by Explore Asheville. So Sports Commission had to, on short notice, seek out new office space, buy furniture, etc. But during that time, they also managed to carry on with what they were doing and do an outstanding job and overcome those obstacles. I guess I'd just like to urge the council to take into consideration to keep the Sports Commission at its current leadership organization. They've done an outstanding job on their own, and there's no reason why they can't continue to do so in the future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ramsey Higgins.
Hello, thank you for making this opportunity for me and those of us that feel we have important things to say. So I am Ramsey Higgins. I am representing Beaverview community, and I have 38 signatures on a traffic calming questionnaire that I have, and they would all be here because as soon as I asked them about this, they were like, sign me up. So the problem that we have on my road in Beaverview, from Bear Creek, North Bear Creek Road to Pisgah View Road, it's a half a mile. There are 8 public transit stops. There are no sidewalks. There's no speed humps, no always stop signs. How do you suppose those people get to those bus stops? In the road. Double yellow line road. People are constantly having to go around them to get around the people because they're in the road. There's nowhere to walk. A lot of times there are small places where they can get over so they don't get hit. I have, for 3.5 years, been working on this. At first, it was being pushed around, and I finally got to the transportation people. They did a traffic count. We qualify. The speed, the amount of vehicles, all of it. We checked all the boxes for that. My suggestion is, well, first I get pushback because they say if we put speed humps in, that would, keep emergency vehicles from getting in and that kind of thing. And I hate to hear that. It's like, there's speed humps in all kinds of neighborhoods and there are emergencies. But my suggestion is that we put always stop signs at strategic places, and those strategic places go hand in hand where the bus stops are, where people are having to access these stops, and they're in places where it's going to slow the traffic down. There would be 4 of them. One place in particular is at Westmore Drive. There's a curve. There's a house across from Westmore Drive, a stone house. The woman that lives in that house was here earlier to speak, but she had to leave because she has a young daughter. She couldn't stay. Her house, her wall, has been hit and obliterated with car parts in her yard 3 times in 3 years. That alone is enough.
Thank you. I think we need to, Yeah, can you go see this lady right here behind you and give her your contact information, and so that, because that's kind of more, we need to have a meeting about that. Okay. Jeff Joyce, Sports Commission. I don't know why I just said that. You guys all signed up with your topics. I don't know why, so I just, apparently tonight we signed up with our topic, so, yeah.
She asked what I was wanting to talk about, so I told her, thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council, appreciate being in front of you. My name is Jeff Joyce, and I represent both the Asheville Tennis Association and the Asheville Sports Commission. I serve on executive committees of both organizations. I'm the vice chair of the Sports Commission. We all want what is best for the sports community. I've been involved in volunteering for several Southern Conference basketball tournaments and had the honor of serving as the volunteer chair for the 3 Billie Jean King Cups that we had in town. These events, plus many more, would not have been possible without the hard work, incredible hard work of the Sports Commission staff and hundreds of volunteers, the 2 staff. Several questions and concerns from the recommendations of the Huddle Up group have to be addressed before we can really make a decision on whether to support those recommendations or not. And I have shared these concerns with the 4 founding members. First, what's the budget going to look like? What's the plan for long-term success? Second, what is the organizational structure going to be? We have 2 incredibly hard-working staff people that are pretty not feeling the love right now. I'm just going to be honest with you. They're not feeling the love. They have very large concerns about their futures. Their names are Chris Smith and Madison Davis. You need to know their names. They have names. And they have heard both terms, merger and takeover. Okay? Hostile takeover, they have heard. So if you look at the slide 17 that Chris shared with you, you will see that list of growth recommendations. So we're going to put those 2 hardworking people that are doing incredible jobs having to grow it even more. But those recommendations double the work that they're doing now, and they are doing outstanding jobs. Another question is if the Sports Commission goes under the auspices of TDA, will the city and county continue to fund it as they are now? Flip side, if it remains independent, will the TDA continue to fund it? Lots of questions, more questions than answers. And finally, what's the future of the 501c3? There are lots of legal and ethical questions that need to be answered for that. I'm glad, I think I heard that there's not going to be a May vote. Thank you, I appreciate that, but that leaves potential for a June vote. Let's put the brakes on. Let's make sure we get this right. Let's know what we're doing, and so we don't have to go back and fix it again. There are other options that we all need to consider. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Carol Peterson.
Good afternoon, council, ladies, and all staff people. I appreciate the work you do. I appreciate the policy that you set out. I appreciate the hardworking staff that you have that carry out your policy. Good job all the way around. I'm here as speaking for the Asheville-Buncombe Regional Sports Commission. Chris Corral had a presentation and he read the mission statement for the Sports Commission. But I think it would be okay if you all heard this again and then let me say something after that. The Asheville-Buncombe Regional Sports Commission will identify and attract sports events and related meetings to enhance wellness and quality of life for area residents and sports enthusiasts. And we will guarantee and we will generate a positive impact by promoting our region as a recognized sporting destination. There's no question that we do this. The Regional Sports Commission does this. Years ago, about 15 years ago, there was a committee that got together in the basement of the Highsmith Center under the direction of Janet Cohn Wilma Sherrill, who was a representative at the time in Raleigh, had heard the word sports tourism and thought, hey, that's something we need to do in Asheville. So Janet called together representatives from the county commission. Kay Ray Bailey and myself did that. Jan Davis, your outstanding former city council person. Greg Duff with Glory Hound Events. Mike Rajajob with ABYSA. Chris Smith, who was with the tourists, and people I know I've forgotten, Kelly Smith with the TDA. We had, our first big win was bringing that SoCon tournament here. I know city people, Sam Powers was instrumental in that. I'm gonna say Jan Davis again. You can't say Sports Commission without saying Jan Davis. There are all kinds of stories about how the SoCon got here. Everybody's got their own take on that. My take is, city got it here. They gave the contract to the Sports Commission, and the Sports Commission saw that it happened. We have the SoCon tournament here through 2026. Their 100th year of celebrating the basketball tournament will be here in Asheville. We've had the Billie Jean King Cup 3 out of 5 years. That is unbelievable in America. We had the Williams sisters here, Venus and Serena. You should stand in a buffet line beside them. They're Amazons. Asheville Championship, Roy Williams, who was one of my students at Robertson High School. He's brought that here. Great Smoky Mountain Grapple. We have outstanding leaders in the wrestling community. A young man named Mark Harris, who is an all-state wrestler at ENCA and has a grand championship team there. I thought I'd just throw that out. I can't quit now. I've got to say that you all have got to let the Sports Commission stand as we are. We do a great job. Debbie Smith back here has about 400 volunteers who volunteer with the Sports Commission. You're not going to get that through TDA.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You forgot to say your husband was his principal. Jan Davis.
I think we
Mayor and Council, it's an honor to be here. I don't normally stand up here to talk to you all because I know what you're sitting through. I've been in those seats, and you know, you got a great opportunity, and I know you do it well. The Sports Commission, and Carol said most of the things I was going to say, but I think most importantly, you need to know really where it came from. We had an old building down there, the Civic Center, that was not in good shape at all. We had an opportunity to make a bid for the Southern Conference tournament. We had been working, as Carol said, to develop a sports commission. And we had met for weeks and weeks and weeks, and just parallel to the bid for the Southern Conference tournament, which became the key event, we came together at the right time with the right people. We formed the right partnerships, TDA, the county, who Esther, you can recall, things were not great with the county. And this was, the city and the county were at odds over water over the years, and this was a healing process. Everybody came together, contributed to making it happen, and the Sports Commission was born. What you lose with losing the Sports Commission as it stands now is that grassroots effort, that getting together, going out, and you ask some great questions about how it affected the local community. It gives local people, local kids, an opportunity to see collegiate and professional athletes, to be athletes themselves at the grapple. It just does so much for the community beyond just doing tourism. It is a great tourism thing. We were accountable for a great deal of what TDA put into the community this year. And I think that if we lose the standalone Sports Commission, then we lose the opportunity of that grassroots effort where we get 140 volunteers out for an event. That's the important part of this thing staying together. Now, it would be funded probably more properly with TDA, but I'm afraid ultimately it would kind of just be dissolved into it. And I fear that because I'm on the executive board and have been on that board for many years, and I just can't tell you how it would hurt to see that board just go away and not really be a part of what's creating sports events in this community. So you have that opportunity. I appreciate you putting the brakes on it. I would really a while ago, I thought maybe we would get some question and answer time and would be very available. If you want to do a workshop or a work session on it, I would be very happy to be there, and Carol and some of the people that have been a part of this thing for a long time. But I thank you for what you do. I do appreciate that you said, let's think about it a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next person signed up to speak is Tom Tesser, but I don't see him here. George Morisani.
My name is George Morizani. I've lived and worked around Asheville for 55 years. And I'm very proud of the city. I enjoy coming downtown and enjoy doing many things that are around here. Unfortunately, I have been concerned about the safety and public safety. And with that in mind, let me first commend you all for putting the 60-day plan in. And Ms. Kilgore and I talked about it the night it would happen, and I'm very, very happy with that. And I'm also happy with the budget today. I'm glad I was here for 3 hours or whatever it was, and saw that you have acknowledged a need for the public safety people. We had a policeman shot just recently in town. It's not an easy job. It's not an accountant upstairs. It is someone that puts their life on line. And I see what you have in there, but I must say, if you have to give people bonuses to get them here, or we need to spark them and say they're fully welcome here or anything else, that's something else. I know for the last 2 years, I've walked downtown, I have breakfast every Saturday at the Med, and you see the people living in the doors, and you see, it's not the way to live. I have a piece of land in Hendersonville that I paid $20,000 to clean up because somehow, and I didn't know it, that at the railroad track on a piece of land that I own that's vacant, that they set up a tent city. And the city of Hendersonville said, that's your land, clean it up. So with any regards, I'd like you to continue to work hard on doing the public service and to get the service people, the police here, and get us as a community to support it. Last but not least, I don't know if you have any plans or any thoughts about the sanctuary city designation you all have here, and with the new people coming across the border starting in 2 days, I hope you have some plan that the buses don't come here as they're going in upstate New York. Again, thank you. I appreciate being in this town. I want to be here several more years, and let's make it a little safer for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody, can we just skip ahead to the lady with the kids? Are you, Ingrid? Yeah, Ingrid Bailey. Yes, David, I thought that's what you might be doing, so please.
I'm gonna try and do my best.
Take your time.
So thank you to the members of the City Council. My name is Ingrid Bailey, and I am the wife of an APD officer. I am speaking tonight because I believe it's important for you and the community to see and hear from the people that are directly affected by the decision that is made by this council. My husband joined law enforcement at 39 years old because he wanted to help people and be a role model to our sons, to show one person can enact change. We have been proud to call North Carolina home for the past 16 years. We relocated here in 2021 because it was our dream to call these beautiful mountains a home. I unfortunately do not get to attend a lot of these meetings because my husband is usually working overtime here, but I always make sure to watch. I was struck by something a member of the council said in regards to recruiting efforts in a previous meeting. The sentiment was that when APD posts pictures and ads, they are sure to highlight the beautiful mountains and all the outdoor activities our community has to offer to entice people to come to APD. There is no doubt that the people want to live in Asheville. We did for that very reason. However, that is not the reality that these police officers and their family are living in. Not a single officer I know doesn't work overtime to be able to afford to live here, so I don't know how much they get to enjoy the beauty. Now, I'd like to talk about the community. I think most of us agree that community policing is a positive thing for both the officers and the people that they serve. My husband lives in his patrol area, but that is only possible because we rent an apartment. Affording a home on our salaries, I'm an elementary school teacher, is not likely. I was a homeowner at 22, and now I'm scared I'll not experience that unless I leave Asheville. My husband loves what he does and makes an effort to get to know the people, businesses, and organizations in his community. Just last week, he attended career day at Estes Elementary and volunteered for the Special Olympics at the high school. You can ask many of the local businesses, and they know Officer Bailey. And they probably have his card and personal phone number. Sorry. We constantly run into people he has helped, and I think the visibility and accountability is important on both sides. However, the salary is a barrier for us to continue to stay in this community we call home. We are looking at moving to smaller towns where the salary for police officers is the same, but cost of living is much less. The proposed budget increase for officer salary is 6%. Do we honestly think that we're going to boost recruitment numbers or retain the existing officers that we have here? 6% doesn't even account for the rising cost of living in Asheville, has one of the highest costs in North Carolina, not to mention increased medical benefits for city employees. While medical coverage for the officers is great, once they have their families, the cost greatly increases. My family is paying $480 a month. Cigna, the city's provider, was out of network for many of the doctors and specialists my son, who has a disability, needs to see. His weekly therapies cost us $160 out of pocket. Specialty doctors are far and few between here. I know this is just one officer and his family's experience, but I am certain many would share a similar sentiment. I constantly hear, well, you knew what public service paid, you shouldn't have joined. What will happen when there are no more police officers? Teachers, social workers, firefighters. Public service is important and needed, so please remember that when you are finalizing the budget for people who serve this community.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, David Rogers.
Well, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. This is a good tie-in since she came first. If you look at the inflation rates over the last year and the last month that's available to look at, the inflation rate, the lowest rate in the last 12 months is 5%. So effectively what you're doing is not even keeping up with inflation. You know, it's been from 9 to 5%. So I'm asking for what I think the chief of police is asking. I think I've heard him say he would like to make our police department the highest paid in the state. Not 6%, the highest in the state. And I know that's gonna be hard to dig in and do that, but if you guys wanna make a change, we're gonna have to do something drastic. 6% isn't gonna incentivize anybody to come here. I mean, how are they gonna pay for their bills? These are people that put their lives on the line. They need to get paid more than anybody else in our town. People got shot this weekend. Hopefully they had their bulletproof vests and stuff. They need your support. That goes a long way too, along with the money, is to support the police. So I urge you to consider looking at the rates around the state and think about matching the highest rates, because we have the highest vacancy rate. And it's just basic, intuitive business. I mean, if you want to make a change, you've got to do something drastic. You're competing against small towns where people can live larger on the same rate that you're paying here. We're going to have to do better, or else we're going to get worse police. And I know you guys want to have good police. If you're not paying them well, what are you going to do? You're going to have people leaving. We're going to get the, hate to say it, the dregs, people that can't find jobs anywhere else. We want to have a good staffed police. You need to pay them, the best in the state. So please reconsider that. There are ways that you can do things with the budget. Maybe put a cap on how much money you give to developers every year. We give land away that cost us $5 million for a dollar. Maybe put a cap on how much of that we do each year, 5, 10 million, 20 million. Then you'll have revenues. Or put a cap on how many incentives you give to people who are building affordable housing and say, we can only afford to do 5 million this year, or 10 million, or 20 million. Put some kind of a cap on it so you guys will still have revenues coming in from tax dollars. When you give the tax dollars away, we don't have the money to pay the police. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. William Snelson. David Blyer. Lee Matthews. Nina Tobish.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Please excuse my informal attire. I had a scheduling challenge today. So we heard a lot this evening about the budget and other important issues facing our city. And I believe the key to addressing issues of homelessness, public safety, and the health of our city budget is a diverse and thriving economy. Lowering disparities in income leads to less crime and reduced homelessness. We invest in tourism, and that makes sense. Tourism will always be an important contributor to our local economy. It is, however, subject to boom and bust cycles, and it doesn't really reduce income gaps much. As a community, we need to invest in growing an economic sector that pays everyone in it a living wage or better. We need to lead the way in supporting, incentivizing, and growing our local talent, expertise, and educational and institutional resources in the fields of environmental sustainability and climate resilience. Asheville should be a beacon for the nation in this sector. We should be attracting national enterprises as well as investing in our local businesses. As a city, our thriving future depends on great jobs that pay well and an economy and infrastructure prepared to weather the challenges of climate disruption. We're investing in tourism. We're investing in sports and recreation. We need to pivot and invest equally or even more in an economic sector that is thoroughly future-proof, that employs an educated and skilled workforce, and that will strengthen our community in a broad and deep way. Let's truly put Asheville on the map as Climate City. It'll be good for tourism, too.
Honor Moore.
Good evening. Nice to see everybody. I hung in here. Most of our crew went home, but when I saw that Ingrid, a police officer's wife, with two tiny kids and one disabled, could hang in here to come and speak to you all, I knew I could. We have a supply and demand right now in our city with police officers. The public is asking for more police patrols in all of the neighborhoods. We know this. Our group is hyper-focused on this for 7 or 8 months now. We continue to grow. We've become sort of a group of a depository for public concern. But we also continue to educate ourselves, meeting with local organizations, listening to concerns on all sides of our city. But we do keep hearing from just regular people in all the neighborhoods around Asheville. They want more police patrols. That's a common theme. So everybody's been discussing the budget. And I don't know if you guys know, you probably do, that Charlotte starts off at $51,465 and tops out at about $90,000. And I've heard that that's actually going to go up. That's about to go up. We know that there's a bill proposed so that the State Highway Patrol is going to get a really huge raise. And the proposal with the APD officers starting out at $45,856, topping out at $61,399. The Asheville Coalition for Public Safety feels that's just not enough. It's not competitive enough to keep up with competitive with cities even close by. We all know that you can't even find a starter home in Buncombe County for much under $550,000 at this point. And then I want to say this, that I know everybody here continues to see massacres happening, all over the country. And I hope it never happens in Asheville. But when I saw the body cam footage of the police officers in Nashville that went into that school, I heard from so many different people in law enforcement how that was a textbook example of how to handle a massacre, should it ever occur. The police officers will study that and understand what they did was amazing, what they risked. And I think we need to remember that we can't keep managing a city with half a police force. It's not okay. And you guys know this, money talks. I don't think that the increases are still enough. Nobody in our group thinks they're enough to move the needle. So we're asking the city to please consider a higher increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel Dean.
Good evening, council members and Mayor Manheimer. My name is Daniel Dean. I work and live here in Asheville. I want to first thank those that have spoken up for our service workers and continue to advocate for affordable housing. I'm also seriously concerned about the proposed police budget increase. I understand the concerns about crime in our city and the cost of living for all of us here in Asheville. We all want to live in a safe community. However, this budget increase does not address the underlying issues of mistrust that many of us have with local law enforcement. To build trust, we must first have accountability. We need direct community control of the police to hold law enforcement accountable to the communities they are policing. We don't need another oversight board that only reports to the city, but a directly elected all-civilian council with final authority over police policy, oversight policy, budget, authority to investigate, hire and fire, and negotiate union contracts. This has been previously proposed by former state representative Susan Fisher, but was not taken up by the General Assembly. I'd like to add that the PBA was on board with this. We must all continue to push for this despite the setbacks. Chicago's Community Commission of Public Safety is a leading example that this is a tangible goal. We cannot just throw money at the police department and ignore the issues that brought thousands of people onto the streets in 2020 to protest police brutality. We cannot ignore the past and current missteps of APD. We have a deputy chief who was just on trial for sex trafficking in Virginia. He is accused of protecting a prostitution ring within his former department. That needs to be investigated by an independent commission. We're talking about a police department that shot and killed Jerry Williams in 2016, that continues to tear down homeless encampments and arrest journalists and nonviolent activists. Their public image is deservedly awful. Without putting the same increase in budget towards the root causes of crime, poverty and inequality, or community-based resources, we can only expect that this budget increase will ultimately serve the wealthiest among us rather than the most vulnerable. We are all the stakeholders when it comes to policing in Asheville, and we need community control of this department. Thank you.
As is my practice, if there is misinformation stated during a public comment period, I will flag it. And there was some misinformation that you stated, but obviously everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I think some of the references to the trials that you mentioned are not correct. Cheryl Sermons.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Sermons. I was getting nervous about talking again tonight, but I'm courageous. I'm going to be one of those people that you guys were, the 517, the homeless people. I'm 58, I'm disabled, and I've talked to you guys before about this. I moved here in 2020, a victim of domestic violence, not on Social Security disability. I had plenty of money, I had another income, but I lost that income. And I guess what my thing is I did the 18 months of, financial, rental assistance through the federal government. And I'm sitting here tonight, and when it comes to affordable housing or rental assistance, it's all coming from the federal government, but you guys don't mind doing $2 million to Harris. And does the city own Harris? Yes. Why doesn't the city say, hey, let's not wait for the federal funds? And then the last time I was here, I think it was in April, there was $7 million, I believe, that was going to the tenant base. And you guys put it towards, or you were proposing to put it towards construction. Wait, don't say it, please. You have to understand, you're waiting for federal funds. And Friday, if I don't come up with $5,000, I'm gonna be on the street at 58. So why don't we as a city, instead of $20 million for sports, which, sports are great, but why are we waiting for the federal government? Why isn't the city saying, wow, it sucks to see all those people with homeless signs? And then you're saying, oh, wow, they don't like the restrictions. Would you want to be restricted in your own home? No, I don't think so. Everybody deserves, this is United States of America. And I see the light. United States of America. People from Ukraine came over, they got housing, they got TANF, they got all this stuff. Nothing, no guidelines. I'm told today by Philip Hardin, go ahead and apply again. We'll deny you. Great. So what am I supposed to do? That's all I have, and you can make your faces at me, which is very impolite.
I'm totally not, I'm just looking. Sorry.
Thank you.
Jonathan Wainscott. Rondell Lance.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. It's good to be here tonight. My name is Rondell Lance. I'm president for Torn Order Police, Lodge 1 in Asheville. I worked at the police department for 26 and a half years, retired, surprisingly, 8 years ago. And I met one of the nicest, most professional ladies, and I'm surprised to come here. Maggie's still here. Maggie, there is life outside the city of Asheville. Spread your wings and fly.
Don't tell her that.
But I appreciate Maggie and her professionalism. She's been a friend to me and helped me so many times, so it's good to see you here tonight, Maggie. About 4 weeks ago, I was in Raleigh at legislative breakfast. I got to speak to Lindsey Prather and other legislators down there about law enforcement issues. I was at a FOP conference in Greenville, North Carolina. I'm flying out Saturday to go to Washington, D.C. for the Law Enforcement Memorial. We're going to add names to the wall there of officers that's lost their life in the line of duty. And for the last 2 years, when people would ask me about the city of Asheville and the law enforcement community, I'm saying, it's bad. It's really bad. I can't recommend you come to Asheville and be a law enforcement officer. The environment is not good. But about 8 months ago, I changed my attitude. After having meetings at the lodge with employees, officers, and with the chief, we've had 4 meetings there. Talked to the chief personally. And following this new council that's been put in place, I'm encouraged about what I'm seeing. I'm encouraged about the efforts being made to change the environment in the city of Asheville for our law enforcement family. The issues that caused the loss of officers, it's going to take a minimum of 2 years to overcome that. A minimum, if not more. And there's still a long way to go. But I believe that, council, you're on the right path. Ms. Campbell, I appreciate you and helping on the right path. I really do believe that. The issues that caused that, but I feel positive we can once again get back to the level that will ensure public safety and a positive influence on the city and those that visit Asheville. The FOP, we feel they're at the right point, still some issues to address, and some of the issues that affect law enforcement is outside the purview of the city, of council, and we deal with that. But we'll continue to fight in Raleigh, in DC, and locally for the officers here. And we understand also, at the FOP and our officers understand, our goal is to have an environment where Asheville for law enforcement that is professional, respected, properly compensated. But we understand to reach that goal, for the officers also have to make a commitment. You have to make a commitment as an officer to conduct, that your conduct be moral, ethical, professional, and understand and respect the citizens. The FOP, we are putting together training to say this is how you need to treat the citizens of Buncombe County. This is their rights, understand their rights, and treat them this way. I've watched over hundreds of body cameras, and
Thank you.
we need to change both ends. Maggie,
Brian Sadie. I think I'm saying that right. That's the last person signed up to speak. Council, we have a closed session.
Before I do have a closed session, there were two comments about members of our community that may be part of the migrant community of the human family. May I take a moment of personal privilege?
Sure.
I went and looked at the city of Asheville's vision. And while I acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do when we talk about our neighbors who may be migrating for a variety of reasons, we are on the ancestral land of the Cherokee and Nicaragua people, and so our vision is stated, quote, Asheville is a great place to live because we care about people. We invest in our city and we celebrate our natural and cultural heritage. Our city is for everyone. Our urban environment and locally based economy support workers, entrepreneurs, and business owners, families and tourists, and people of all ages. Cultural diversity and social and economic equity are evident in all that we do. Our neighborhoods are strong. Participation in civic life is widespread. And collaborative partnerships are the foundation of our success and what makes us special, end quote. I know we have a lot of work to do, and I hope that it may be so.
Okay, we have a, go ahead.
All right, I make a motion. I have two together, and I'll make them together. One is to prevent disclosure of information as privileged and confidential pursuant to the laws of North Carolina or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of the General Statutes. The statutory authorization is contained in NC General Statute 143-318.11A1. The law that makes the information privileged and confidential is North Carolina General Statute 143-318.10E. 132-1.7A and B. The second motion is I move that the city of Asheville go into closed session to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, conditions of appointment, or conditions of initial employment of an individual public officer or employee or prospective public officer or employee. The statutory authorization is contained in North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11A6.
That's a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? All right, we will adjourn from the closed session. Maggie, you were off by 8 minutes.
8 minutes, Maggie, getting loose over there.